Our dear friend and colleague, Councillor Robert Pasuta. You're now one for words, so I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you for a speech, but anything you'd like to say?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Jason. It's good to be back. It was an interesting battle, but the medical professions and all the help I've got up to this point, and since December when this happened, I've had over 132 appointments. So I'm back doing a little bit of farming, and the boys are helping a lot. But I got some gray, as Mayor Fred, I got some gray hair, yes I did. But you know what, it's good to be back around the table, and I'd like to thank Councillor Partridge and Allison, her office, for all the work they've done and helped. I know Donna, Councillor Skelly, has worked on a few projects of mine and we need to catch up. And Councillor Ferguson, I'd like to thank you for all your help with my constituents. It's much appreciated. It's great to be back amongst my colleagues and friends. Thank you.
And your Lynn has been absolutely amazing, Robert. We're really happy to see you this morning, and we look forward to you being happier and healthier by the day. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals and the media may also be audibly and or visually recording this meeting as well. A reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched off to non-audible during the committee meetings. Madam Clerk, changes?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, yes, we have 9 added delegation requests, all respecting the LRT. 4.1, Melina Balta. 4.2, Gaspar Bonamo. 4.3, Michelle, I apologize if I mess up your last name, Harushka. Carol Lazich, Julie Gordon, Mark Salenzi, Franco Corti, Donna Crockett, Mark Rayon, and Alan Bureau. Added appendices to item 8.1. You have an A and a B that both go with that, and they're in your yellow copies. As well, there is a new notice of motion, 10.2, respecting the endorsement of a unionized Hamilton light rail transit workforce. We have 5 pieces of correspondence, 11.1 through 11.5. These pieces of correspondence have been received in the past through various offices, either councillors or the mayor's office, and we put them on here to be officially received through the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Motion now to approve the agenda as amended, moved by Pearson, seconded by Connolly. All in favor? That's carried. Any declarations of interest? I see none. Delegation requests 4.1 through 4.9 are all in today's GIC. Committee's requests respecting items 4.1 to 4.9. Anybody? Moved by Councillor Green, seconded by Councillor Pearson. All in favor? Any opposed? So that carries. On to public hearings and delegations. I'd like to call upon our first delegate, Melina Balta, to speak respecting items 8.1 and 10.1 on today's agenda.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning to everyone, visitors, Mayor, and councillors. You know I am opposed to LRT to start off, but here we are. I would like to address Environment Assessment Approval of Chris Bullard, Minister of Environment and Climate Change. We have had this year enormous dumping of raw sewage into our bay and Lake Ontario. We currently have 1 pipe taking rainwater and raw sewage. There are no plans to upgrade sewage management during LR3 construction in order to avoid and minimize these problems in the future. We need 2 separate pipes for domestic sewage and rainwater. Our current system is inadequate for the future. This will cause ecological damage to our environment. Domestic sewage is also very likely to contain disease-causing microbes. When sewage enters a lake or a stream, microorganisms begin to decompose the organic materials. Oxygen is consumed as microorganisms use in their metabolism. ecological damage. Sewage contaminated water causes purification, which is the increase of concentration of chemical elements required for life. The nitrates, phosphates, and organic matter found in human waste serves as food for algae and bacteria. This causes these organisms to overpopulate to the point where they use up most of the dissolved oxygen that is naturally found in water, making it difficult for other organisms in this aquatic environment to live. The bacteria are basically strangling the other organisms. Some of the organisms that do overpopulate from this can be disease-causing microorganisms. Phosphates are also found in soaps and detergents, but there are other household products that we use every day that can be toxic to many animals and humans if they are dumped directly into body of water. Remember, we are polluting waterways and affecting Burlington, Oakville, Grimsby, St. Catharines, Niagara-on-the-Lake, and many other cities and towns. What about economic cost to our community? Do we have the right to impose our waste on other communities? An example, Hamilton Spectre ran on the 24th article. Overwhelmed city pipes and treatment plants have dumped the equivalent of 1,300 Olympic-sized swimming pools of diluted sewage into the harbor this year spring. A record-breaking April storm followed by weeks of relentless rain repeatedly overloaded the Woodward treatment plant, prompting the city to bypass untreated or partially treated.
Directly, that you're concerned that this new infrastructure is actually going to mean thousands of liters of raw sewage being dumped into Hamilton Harbor? Is that what you're concerned about?
Based on our past history and the situation as it stands, and with the proposal of continuing forward with consolidated sewers, I'm not an engineer, but I think I can put two and two together. And I mean, I'm assuming, based on this information, that yes, there's going to be a huge amount of additional raw sewage that's going to overload our systems.
Okay, and where does that raw sewage go?
Into the harbor.
Okay, through the chair. Those are my questions. Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Lloyd Ferguson.
Yes, I can. Can I ask our staff a question just to get clarity on something?
For clarity.
Through you to Dan or Gary, I see Gary's here too. Do you intend to, when you relocate the underground utilities on the LRT line, do you intend to reinstall combined sewers?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it depends on where on the corridor you're speaking. East of the Red Hill Valley Parkway, it's already a separated system. West of the Red Hill Valley Parkway, it's combined systems that exist there now, and this issue is not unique to the LRT corridor. It's with infill and development within the urban environment everywhere. So I think the situation that's in front of us now gives us an opportunity with new development to install low-impact development or follow low-impact development strategies to try to minimize the amount of stormwater that's actually getting into the combined sewers. But there will be combined sewers reinstalled along the corridor west of the Red Hill.
And does 100% of the product in the combined sewers go into stormwater management tanks in a storm so it can be treated?
Through you, Mr. Chair, any flow that goes into the combined sewer network makes its way to Woodward. And as your committee is very aware, we've got some upgrades planned at Woodward for dealing with the flows down there.
So there's no raw sewage then going into the harbor post-construction? It'll all go to the plant?
I think the intent is to certainly have less than we have now, because we're going to be trying to eliminate and reduce the amount of storm flow going into the combined system.
Okay, so just so the public has clarity on this, Dan, when the product comes through the combined sewer, it goes to the sewage treatment plant. The only time, because you put that little kicker in there, less than we had before. So the exceptions will be a severe storm where the plant can't handle it or anything else, and you do cursory treatment and the rest is put in the harbor. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay, so there's nothing going into the bay that's untreated. It'll receive some form of it, but only in extreme storms. Regular storms, it'll all go through the plant, correct?
Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, first time, Councillor Whitehead, then you. Thank you.
In your presentation, I take it, and I'm going to ask the question of staff as well, it's clear that the combined system is not the best practice in respect to dealing with sewage. Is that your understanding through the chair?
Yes, it is.
I'm going to ask the staff the question. Is combined system the best practices in regards to addressing stormwater and sewer?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, it's not. I suspect if we were trying to replace the combined system in Hamilton, we'd probably be in the order of magnitude of $1 billion if we were to try to separate the entire combined system.
Thank you. So we acknowledge that the combined system is less than desirable. Second question. You mentioned that there may be consideration to expand the capacity along that corridor to accommodate new growth. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, I believe so.
Thank you. Can I ask Nan, if you create capacity along the corridor, on your north-south connections, would you not have to expand the capacity to take on that new capacity? And if you do so, what's the cost of that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't know if we have the answer as far as the exact number that it would cost to do that, but essentially all the flow is making its way to the corridor. Now you'd have to find a separate outlet for it at some location, which would be extraordinarily complex and expensive.
Okay, so you are limited. Would that suggest then that you would be limited in regards to the capacity building you can do along that corridor because of the liability of cost to absorb that expansion, bring it down to the treatment plant?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, there are limitations along the corridor, just as there are in every other part of the combined system when it comes to growth.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
And I don't see, who's representing planning? You, Glenn? Okay. Second time. Oh, no, first time, Councillor Partridge, and then we'll go second time to Councillor Skelly.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Deputy Chair, and through you to Dan. Dan, you made a statement referring to low-impact development along the LRT route. Could you just expand to that? Because it's my understanding one of the arguments for the LRT is that there's going to be very high-impact development with thousands of units being built, which would create more impact on the system. So can you just explain that one for me?
Through you, Mr. Chair, low-impact development is just a term that's used for new development where you minimize the amount of stormwater that's leaving a site to reduce the amount of flow that's making its way into the city system. So any development that occurs along the LRT corridor, just as in any other location in the city, it's an opportunity for us to reduce the amount of stormwater that's going to make its way into the combined system.
Okay, thank you, but I thought I understood that you're still going to be in the west end in doing the combined sewer system. Is that correct? So we're not changing the system?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we are changing the system, but it will remain a combined system west of the Red Hill.
Okay, but improved is what I understand?
That's correct.
All right, and how will that be done? If you could just explain the technology behind that for me.
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, I may have to rely on Gary for that, and it may start to get quite complex, but
Yeah.
I think the two key things are where we can combine pipes and put them together. We're going to do that to improve flows and our control of combined sewage, and any of that development that's going to occur will be required to release less stormwater into the system. So by virtue of the fact that there is new growth and new development, there'll be less, the requirements that they will have to follow will mean there's less stormwater making its way into the combined system, which is a good thing.
Okay, and so understanding that any improvements and upgrades, which is just what you referred to, would not be considered like for like. Is that like for like? Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, in the context of stormwater management, I would not characterize it as like for like, no.
Okay, so there would be an increased cost to the taxpayer for that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, I was speaking from a technical perspective.
Right.
From a cost perspective, I believe all the costs are going to be absorbed through the project itself, so.
Okay, thank you. That's not what we've been told in previous meetings, but I'll look forward to a further explanation on that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to get back to the delegate. So if there's questions for the delegate, I allowed the first speaker to go to staff for clarity, and now we're asking questions of staff, which is my fault. So we'll go back to the delegate. If we want to just receive the delegate right now. Moved to receive by Green, seconded by Pearson. All in favor, that's carried. Thank you, Carol, very much. Nice to
Thank you
see
so
you
much.
again. And first time, Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and certainly along the line of the previous questioners, through to Mr. McKinnon then. Is there any intent with the process then? Are we evaluating the need for maybe another combined sewer overflow tank, one or two possibly throughout the city, in conjunction with this development?
Through you, Mr. Chair, specifically for the LRT project, there's no expectation that we're going to have to identify another combined sewer overflow tank. We are in the midst of doing a water wastewater master plan and a flooding and drainage master plan. Those initiatives may identify something like that, and both projects will inform one another. But specifically related to LRT, there's no CSO tank identified.
So it may be a requirement. We may, once the review is done for the stormwater management, et cetera, we may determine that there will be a need going forward in the future. And just for the public's information, what's the usual cost of a combined sewer overflow tank?
Through you, Mr. Chair, they can be anywhere from $10 to $30 million.
Thank you.
Second time, Councillor Skelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through the chair to Dan. Clarify again, so we have a combined sewer stormwater system, correct, along the LRT route currently?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. Essentially, everything north of Mohawk Road between the 403 and the Red Hill is a combined system.
Correct, thank you. And to, ultimately, what would your preference be? To have a dual system or a combined system?
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly in a perfect world, the modern standard of a separated system is the ideal model, but it is cost prohibitive in a situation like Hamilton.
Thank you. And just one last question, and through the chair, since May, do we have any idea how often we have dumped sewage, raw sewage, into either the water or the harbor or elsewhere?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't have the records in front of me. It has been an extraordinary year with the rainfall that we've experienced in Southern Ontario. So it has been an extraordinarily active season for doing bypasses, there's no question.
Thank you. Stephanie is thank you, those are my questions.
Thank you. And move to, well, we already received the delegate. Gaspar, we're going to allow you to, you missed us by a hair, so we'll allow you to come in and speak to us now. We'll stick to questions of the delegate. Once they're through, we'll receive the delegate, and then if there's questions from staff, we'll ask those accordingly. Henceforth. Thereafter. Gaspar, just for clarity, now you have 5 minutes on an agenda item or two here today?
Thank you.
Are you speaking to anything, are you speaking to agenda items on today's agenda?
I'm going to be speaking on the LRT, but not specifically on the environmental aspect items.
So thank you, Gaspar. To Clerk Stephanie, I'm not sure what the protocol would be, given that we may not have something specific to today's agenda with this delegate and possibly others to be helpful. We'll go to the clerk.
I'm sorry, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I didn't hear your question. Just to clarify, though, I did send an email to all delegates requesting specifically that they advise me whether they're speaking to item 8.1 or 10.1. As the process, normal process is that if they don't have an agenda item, or if they're not wanting to speak to an item listed on the agenda, they would first come forward for approval and then speak to a next agenda. I did not receive a response from several parties. Unfortunately, if that answers your question, I didn't hear. Thank you.
Can you go 5 minutes on stuff that's on the agenda, Gaspar?
Well,
So I'm hearing that the clerk tried to reach out to you and possibly you weren't able to respond. and she tried to advise accordingly.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that.
Right into the mic there, Gaspar. Sorry.
Sorry, I thought we were here to discuss LRT facts, and that's
I think the clerk has just noted she tried to reach out to you and others that your delegations have to be in correspondence with items on our agenda.
Okay, and those items, I'm sorry, I must have missed that.
Item 8.1 and item 10.1 on today's agenda. So we would have had the Keep Hamilton's Light Rail Transit public motion by Councillor Green, and our one discussion item on today's agenda regards our environmental project report. Do you have anything on the environmental project report?
I can speak on the environmental.
Sure.
I can speak on combined sewers.
Before you do that, thank you, appreciate that, Gaspar, and others who may be listening and are now understanding that the clerk tried to advise you in advance that we needed to stick closely to the agenda. Councillor Whitehead, you did chime in.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I am quite prepared to waive that rule if it's consistent, a discussion in LRT. After all, our motto is engagement, and this is engagement. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate the accolades you receive, and I'm sure everyone else does as well, but we also have a policy and a procedure, and we're trying to appreciate that as well. So if we want to change the policy and procedure, you need a seconder, and you have Councillor Donna Skelly to do that, and all in favor of changing the policy as it relates to... Say again?
I'm not looking to change the policy, just like we do.
Just for today.
We have rules, for example, on time-sensitive issues. We can waive the rules and move a motion. All I'm saying at this particular time, in this particular discussion, understanding there is a policy, I'm asking us to waive the rules for today. Thank you.
That's fine. That's clear. Is that fine? Okay, so you can do your 5 minutes that you're probably well prepared for, Gaspar, once we have this vote and it's voted accordingly on. So on the motion, Councillor Ferguson.
So just so I'm clear on Councillor Whitehead's motion, he suggested we could have the debate again today whether or not we should approve LRT, because we've already done that.
What my understanding is, Councillor Whitehead would like to just refrain from the policy where delegates generally speak to items on the agenda and make your 5 minutes a free-for-all on all things LRT if you wish, for today.
So that you'll still control the delegates and that we're not going to have the debate again, because it's already decided on whether it's yes or no to LRT, because we've already done that.
I think we'll allow the delegates, should this, to speak on whatever they would like with their 5-minute delegation, ask questions of the delegates accordingly, whether it's pertinent to today's agenda or not. I think that's fair, and whatever advice the clerk may advise on this point.
Dear Mr. Deputy Mayor, we do have a procedural bylaw. It's not a policy. So if members of the public do wish to speak to an item on the agenda, they would submit their request, it would first be approved, and they would speak at the same meeting. If it is just a matter in general, they would come before committee for consideration for a future meeting, not to be waived. And as well, if the information is not new, they will not, or probably not, will be approved if it's just the same information they're providing over and over. Okay. Does that help?
Bylaw, not policy. With regards to the motion, all in favor?
Carried.
Any opposed? Seeing none, go ahead, Gaspar. This is all speakers going forward for today only. Go ahead, Gaspar. Sorry, thank you for your patience.
Thank you. So basically, my discussion today is about the business case for the LRT. Thank you. So I've been studying it quite closely, and this is what I've come up with. So the conclusions reached by the Hamilton King Main Rapid Transit Benefits Case Analysis presented by Metrolinx is based on unattainable transportation user benefits. If the true operating speed was used in the analysis, the LRT project would not be eligible for provincial funding and would not be moving ahead. A business case in support of LRT does not exist. Provincial taxpayers will lose $500 million of the billion to be invested, and Hamilton taxpayers will be losing $1 billion for non-essential unfunded transportation costs. The City of Hamilton chose to pursue the LRT option 2008. That was without a business case. The economic potential study prepared by IBI Group states that public desires alone are not sufficient to justify multi-million-dollar expenditures, and the onus rests with the city to provide the technical and financial justification for investments in rapid transit. The benefits case analysis is the foundational report for undertaking comparative analysis of feasible options for a specific rapid transit project. It demonstrates the benefits and costs associated with each of the options and assists decision makers such as yourselves in selecting a viable option for implementation. This forms a business case for selecting the top performing system, which wasn't followed by Hamilton. The benefits case analysis identified the BRT as the top performing system for Hamilton. This was communicated to Mayor Fred Eisenberger via a memo on February 1st, 2010. And it also noted that the results had not yet been released publicly. On February 19th, 18 days later, after the direct communication with the mayor, Metrolinx presented Hamilton with a revised benefit case analysis that no longer referred to the BRT as a top performer. The report stated that option 1 produces the highest benefit cost ratio of 1.4. That was the BRT option, and that both LRT options generated benefits cost ratios that were greater than 1. A benefit cost ratio less than 1 represents a negative benefit, which means you would not recover your investment from future transportation user benefits. The revised BCA identified the full LRT as the highest cost option and noted that the full LRT in Hamilton would generate the highest transportation user benefits. The revised report made it clear that the majority of transportation user benefits are derived from travel time savings, thus highlighting the importance of the operating speed of the rapid system to the success of the project. This was repeated in the report 8 times. 8 times they stated that the operating speed was very important in the analysis. The results showing the LRT as having substantially higher transportation user benefits were achieved by using an exaggerated, unrealistic LRT speed of 33 and 35 kilometers an hour while traveling through the city. Other BCA reports benchmark these speeds for subterranean transports like subways. The proposed Hamilton LRTs above ground, where the standard travel speed used in the analysis should be somewhere in the order of 20 to 25 kilometers per hour. The use of 33 and 35 kilometers per hour travel speeds for above ground rail is so unusual that the author of the report felt obligated to disclose this inappropriate speed in a footnote, contradicting the speed used in the analysis and stating travel speeds in the downtown core are assumed to be somewhat slower in the range of 25, yet 33 and 35 are used. There is substantial cost savings associated to 1 minute of travel time. The BCA values 1 minute of travel times at $78.5 million in transportation user benefits. The LRT travel time from McMaster to Eastgate appears in the report as 26 minutes, and that's based on the subway speeds. However, if the correct speed is used above ground rail speeds, the travel time would increase to 32 minutes. The increase in travel time would decrease the transportation user benefits from $852 million down to $381 million, thereby reducing the benefit cost ratio from 1.09 to 0.5, making the project ineligible for provincial funding. Hamilton is proceeding with the LRT based on what appears to be a revised fraudulent benefits case analysis.
30 seconds.
Eglinton Crosstown presented by Metrolinx in 2009 shows the LRT traveling through the city at 22 kilometers per hour, while Hamilton shows 33 and 35. In 2008, the decision was made to pursue LRT without knowing if the expenditure could be financially justified. At this point, province, Metrolinx, Steer Davies Gleaves City may be liable for damages resulting from implementation of the Hamilton LRT as the project is proceeding based on a faulty and scripted benefits case analysis. The city has not has not prepared to consider alternatives, was not prepared to consider alternatives when the mayor's office received the news that the BRT was a top-performing system for Hamilton. As a taxpayer and a resident of the city, I'm requesting that City Council consider a motion to cease further expenditure on the LRT project until the validity of the benefits case analysis can be determined. I would also ask Council to consider investigating the possibility that the BCA was revised and scripted by the Mayor's Office and Metrolinx before being released publicly to obtain a benefit cost ratio greater than 1 in order to be eligible for provincial funding. This approach to securing public funds is not in the public's best interest.
Okay, thanks, Gaspar. We have
Thank you.
Councillor Skelly. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaspar, and through the chair, I guess the new information for me anyway, or perhaps it's information that confirms, in your opinion, that the cost-benefit ratio is used to determine whether the province will approve a project. Correct?
That's correct, yes. And the target is to have a benefit cost ratio of 1.
Okay. The numbers, through the chair, presented in our original ask to the province have changed, in your opinion. Is that correct? In other words, the speed at which we determined or proposed that the LRT would run has actually decreased. Is that correct in the information?
Well, what's happened is the report has the speed at 35 and 33 kilometers per hour, and that first column that I show up there, at that speed, the transportation user benefits are calculated at $852 million.
Sorry, I couldn't hear. I apologize.
The speed that was used in the report is 33 and 35 kilometers per hour, and at that speed, your transportation user benefits are $852 million, and it gives you a ratio of 1.09. It's not all up there. Let me just lower this a bit. It's just not cooperating here. Is there a way of getting the full page up there that you know of? Yeah, okay, so we'll just have to see. No, it's Excel. So you can see there that in the, that's not too bad. I think that's fine. In the Metrolinx report, when they use those speeds, they come up with a benefits cost ratio of 1.09. They've met their target of 1. Now, what happened in the report?
Sorry, Gaspar, can you point through the chair what line you're referencing?
I'm looking at the very first column. The very first column shows you the capital cost is $784 million. The travel time at 26 minutes. That's travel time from McMaster to Eastgate, including stops and picking up people. Okay, it's not just the speed of the system, but that would be the overall speed for that.
I'm just going to interrupt you now through the chair. The travel time you're suggesting is now actually 32, and that is our new updated.
That's the column on the right, and
Correct.
That's what's listed on the Hamilton questions that were asked. Basically, we're asked how long will it take for the LRT to go from McMaster to Eastgate, and I think everyone agrees it's 32 minutes.
Okay, and through the chair, based on this updated information, which is now available on our city website, we now have a benefit cost ratio of 0.49.
That's correct.
Which
That's
would
correct.
mean we would not qualify for funding.
With a benefit
if that
cost-
was proposed today, if that was submitted today.
Well, this has been like this all along. It's not just today, just the report didn't reflect the actual numbers. If the actual numbers were reflected, they would come up with a benefit cost ratio of 0.49, and they would say that the BRT is the top performing system because the BRT costs much less money but produces very similar benefits. So the cost benefit ratio for the BRT was actually 1.42, which means that you're going to recover your 100% of your investment, and there's also another 42% above that. And that's why it was stated that it was the best performing system for Hamilton.
So through the chair, if I could summarize what you're presenting today, you're suggesting that the original information submitted to the government are numbers that are not accurate today, and the numbers, if we use the real numbers that we know today, the City of Hamilton would not qualify for LRT but would be considered for BRT?
Absolutely. BRT had a benefits cost ratio of 1.42, and they actually had it going from McMaster to Eastgate in 34 minutes. And really, I think I've heard you, Donna, ask Ted Gill, and he said they would be very similar. So there's no reason to say that the BRT is 34 and the LRT is 32. They're both in segregated lanes, both traveling with light priority. But they made that one a 34, and it still has a benefit cost ratio of 1.42.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Seeing no other questions, move to receive. Moved by Councillor Connolly, seconded by Mayor Fred. All in favor, that's carried. Thank you, Gaspar.
Thank you.
Questions of staff, Councillor Skelly.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure who wants to speak to this, perhaps Paul, if you're there. Good morning, Paul. In light of what we've just heard, the original submission to the province with the lower travel time versus what the City of Hamilton now has posted on its own website, I assume is accurate information. Does that change the benefit cost ratio?
Through the chair, we have not run a benefit cost analysis on it, so I can't comment on what's here, and that's not part of the project now. We were implementing the project, so yes, we've put an estimated travel time of 32 minutes based on where we are today. But in terms of some of those other numbers, I really can't comment on that.
Through the chair, I understand that, but I'm not asking what we're doing today. I'm asking, the question is, the numbers that were submitted are different. Through the chair, were the numbers submitted to the province different than the actual reality of what we're facing today in terms of travel time?
So through the Deputy Mayor, the travel time estimates that we come up with, I mean, I'd have to go back to the documents. I assume what's on the screen is accurate. Yes, there's a difference there. Whether that remains at 32, we also don't know. So this is where we are today, but as you know, 3 companies will be bidding on how they will operate this, and their run times may differ. So to suggest that this is now 32 is the absolute number, I would have to say that that's not necessarily the case. It may change again depending on how this is actually constructed and operated in the future.
Thank you. Through the chair, what could possibly change along the route that would modify the travel time from 32 to the original numbers, which were in the 20s?
So through the Deputy Mayor, it would really be about optimizing the route. So as we look at the actual signal timing and the intersection movements and how those would interact with LRT, that's a possibility. The way that the design of areas where the LRT is completely unimpeded, like our bridge construction, we may be able to accelerate beyond where we're looking at, depending on the vehicle manufacturer. That could have an impact on it as well. And then some of the estimates around loading and unloading. So are we talking massive differences? No. But I do want to mention, because it's been said now that's the number, it is our estimate, best estimate at this point, but whether it shifts by a minute or so or two, we don't know until we get through this whole process.
Thank you. Through the chair, a minute or two wouldn't really have that much of an impact on the cost-benefit ratio. I'm just, perhaps I could ask somebody else, I don't know who can answer this, maybe Chris or someone else, but if we were to submit the numbers as they are today, and I don't see why what was presented is there are any flaws with the assumption that the cost-benefit ratio now drops from 1.49 to just want to make sure I've got the right numbers here, down to 0.54, I think it is. Page 4? I don't have it in here. Anyway, regardless, it drops significantly. Would we, Andrew, can you speak to it perhaps? Would the city have been approved based on the numbers, the information that was presented this morning, based on updated information, knowing the travel time is no longer in the 20s, but over 30 minutes, and even if it goes from 32 to 30, it's still significantly, been significantly increased. Would the City of Hamilton been approved for LRT based on the updated information presented today?
The question's for Andrew.
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor. So I think the important thing to keep in mind here is The benefits case process that's done for all of the project is not strictly a benefit cost ratio. That's not the only parameter. It's what's called a multiple account evaluation. So it looks at economic costs, benefits, it looks at environmental benefits, it looks at additional metrics through a social community account, including looking at land use shaping, impacts on the road network, construction impacts. So there's a variety of factors that go into the overall assessment of a given project. The comparison of transportation user benefits and financial costs, which gives you your cost-benefit ratio, is one of those elements. It's not the only element that goes into the assessment of a project.
Thank you. Through the chair, with this updated information, with the benefit cost ratio going from 1.09 to 0.49, would the province look favorably on LRT over BRT? Through the chair, with the information we have, the updated information, knowing what we know, is this not given more weight than anything else when they're determining whether to fund a project?
Through the chair, as I said, the economic cost-benefit ratio is one aspect. It's not the only aspect. That's the whole reason that the evaluation has moved to a multiple account evaluation. It's to assess all impacts of a particular project through 5 different accounts, not just purely the cost-benefit ratio. With respect to whether the cost-benefit ratio for LRT or BRT would change if we ran it again today, with the additional work that's happened over the last 7 years in terms of the design, it's possible that both the cost-benefit ratio for BRT and LRT could change. One example is, at the time the BCA was done, it was done at a very early stage of the process when we didn't have a full understanding of where all the stops would be, and there were assumptions made about station spacing for both BRT and LRT. For example, through the downtown section that that was referenced, at the time the BCA was done, it was estimated that stops would be 800 meters apart for both BRT and LRT. We've since that time added additional stops through the downtown, and I assume that would have been the case for BRT as well, for the same reason they've been added for LRT. So it's difficult to sit here today and say, you know, the BRT results would be the same as they were 7 years ago, but the LRT would be different. I think both of them would end up being different based on the changes in project design that have happened over the last 7 years.
Thank you.
So for those folks who may not know who Andrew is, he's the director representing Hamilton LRT and Metrolinx here in the city, working closely with our city staff. Thank you. Any other questions on the delegate's presentation? I'm going to go back. Michelle is here now. Rushka, if you want to come up and offer 5 minutes. And I'm not sure if you were in attendance when Councillor Whitehead moved and was seconded by Councillor Skelly on opening the 5-minute delegations up to anything you would like to talk about today with respect to LRT. Thanks for coming, Michelle.
Thank you for having me. Sorry, I kind of slept in this morning. Okay, today I'd like to talk about specifically language. So initially I was neither pro or anti-LRT, but there were a lot of things that I came on board with Carol and her group. That's why I kind of side with them a little bit. But with the ATU 107 coming out with this keep transit public. So I'm like, well, what does that really mean? So I went into Wikipedia just to look up public transit. And what I found was it's public transit is the same as mass transit, which means it's accessible to the majority or the general public. But in reality, there are certain segments of our population here in the city that don't have access to public transit because they don't have the money to. And they include the homeless, people on OW, and even ODSP. So I also, I have a question about that. So if it's public transit, it has to be accessible for everyone, but it's not. So there's a misnomer there. So then I decided to look up HSR. And so the history of it. So I learned that it came into being in 1899. And most of its life, HSR has been held in private hands. It wasn't really until the amalgamation of the city that HSR became a part under the municipality. So I'm kind of confused when they're saying keep public transit. What does that really mean? So ATU 107 definitely didn't come out speaking against the LRT. They've held a neutral view, so that's kind of confusing in itself. So for myself and people who are like me, we are the people at the bottom of the rungs. We have never been asked. We've never been consulted. Our thoughts are not ever taken into consideration. So I see a huge amount of money to destroy what I see in this city, which is going to, be a further thing into the gentrification, where low-income people are going to lose housing and all kinds of other things. So I don't know. I'm not really impressed by any of this. And as one of my comrades on Facebook, talking about liberal democracy, he's got my ire up too on liberal democracy and what that really means. Because while you people are elected, a lot of people who are in this formula are not. And the people themselves, the general people, have been left out of the equation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. Any questions? Move to receive. Councillor Green, seconded by Councillor Connolly. All in favor? That's carried. No opposed. On the delegation, a question or two to staff from Councillor Green.
Just one question. I heard that HSR was private until amalgamation. Through you, just to Dan McKinnon or Chris, perhaps just to maybe provide some clarity and correction on that statement. Just in terms of public transit in the municipality of Hamilton historically.
If I can, through the chair, I'll have to look up when it became a public function. It's well before amalgamation. I know I joined the organization in 1995, and it was a public entity then. So we'll get back to you as a precise time that it became a public agency.
Okay, well, given the magic, Mr. Deputy Mayor, given the magic of Google and the amount of historical knowledge of ATU here in the room, perhaps in future delegations, or if somebody's up today, they might want to provide some clarity, because I don't want that floating out there, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that it was private up until amalgamation, because I just know that not to be true. Thank you.
That was a good question. We have asked that of our eldest statesman behind you, which would have been Gary Moore by a long shot. Julie Gordon is our next speaker, if she is here, from Julie Gordon Books and beautiful. Oh no, it's a different Julie Gordon. Are you Julie Gordon? Yes, oh, there's more than one Julie Gordon in the Hammer. Okay. 5 minutes on anything and everything LRT, Julie.
Okay.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, the magic of Google, 1960, as Councillor Merulla has identified, it was bought from, just for clarity, it's important that it was bought from Canada Coach Lines. Provincial ownership ended in 46, so it had it up until then. And then the city of Hamilton bought it in 1960. So it's been public for quite some time.
Yeah.
Thank you. Julie. Coming up after Julie is Mark.
Hi.
Hi, Julie.
I want to talk about why I believe the LRT is not green technology. I feel a lot of people have jumped on board with the LRT because they think it's better for the environment, and I need to refute that. I'm concerned about the increase of nuclear power to generate electricity for the LRT. At this time, approximately 50% of our electricity comes from nuclear power. And most of us know the problem with nuclear power is the production of high-level radioactive waste. And there is a problem finding storage for this waste, and it takes thousands of years for it to break down. So the LRT may not be as green as people believe. If you look at it from the point of view that the LRT will require electricity from nuclear power technology, then we have an argument against the green technology idea. Nuclear energy is not carbon neutral. UK scientists are saying that the carbon footprint from nuclear power is way above the limit recommended by the Committee on Climate Change. In Canada alone, our use of electricity is almost the highest in the world. As of 2008, 53% of Ontario's electricity is from nuclear power. Greenhouse gases are emitted at all stages of the lifestyle of the reactor. The provincial government is working with power companies to make sure that the reactors are being refurbished to extend the life of the reactor. Many people out there are equity holders benefiting from electricity business, including Municipal Employees Retirement System, the Trans-Canada Court, the Power Workers Union, and the Society of Engineering Professionals. Although nuclear power is expected to account for at least 42% of the needs by 2025, the demand for electricity will increase with the use of LRT. As of last year, Energy Minister Bob Torelli said that the refurbishment of Darlington would ensure that nuclear power would continue to be our largest power source. The Liberal government plans to extend the lifespan of Darlington and Bruce Power by 30 years, bringing us past 2025. The production of electricity from nuclear power may be cost efficient, but the disposal of the waste is worrisome and expensive. We must not ignore the engineers who have criticized the LRT. Carl Turkstra said that the LRT would precipitate many secondary effects. The production of radioactive waste would be a secondary effect. The law of unintended consequences will inevitably present itself. One more issue which I wanted to bring up. Not trying to overwhelm you. Electromagnetic fields, I believe, is another problem we need to look at. Hatch-Mott MacDonald did a study about the effects of electromagnetic fields from the LRT and how they present a problem for some of the machines at McMaster Hospital. One of the reasons I am concerned about EMFs is because the health and safety impact on humans. If people at McMaster Hospital are concerned about the impact of EMFs on research labs and equipment, what about the vulnerability of human flesh? The Canadian Association of University Teachers is also concerned about electromagnetic fields and what EMFs are doing to students and fellow staff at the university. They are seeing symptoms similar to burnout, which would affect a person's ability to learn. Some people have acquired electromagnetic hypersensitivity. They will feel confused, unable to concentrate or remember, and may end up fatigued with headache and unable to sleep. Some of these symptoms are associated with stress or early onset of Alzheimer's. Dr. Magda Hayes at Trent University is also seeing many cases of EHS on students and staff. The Commission of European Communities is also recognizing that EMFs are an occupational health and safety hazard. I realize that this is not a big issue right now in Canada because we have no federal guidelines to protect our health from electromagnetic fields. Maybe we could be an example here in Hamilton. But I believe it is worth taking into consideration to prevent future health problems.
Thank you, Julie.
You're welcome.
Any questions? Move to receive, Councillor Whitehead, seconded by Councillor Jackson. All in favor? It is carried. Thank you. Mark Salenzi. Donna will be next, and then we have Mark and Elaine.
Good morning, and thank you for making that exception during the the initial start here, because I didn't have any items for the agenda 8.1 or 10.2, so thank you for the councillors for allowing that. I guess I'm going to change my swift here really quickly. I do have an issue with what was commented regarding the cost-benefit analysis of this. I guess as councillors, your decisions are going to be based on that report. Your decisions are going to be based on the feasibility of this project. The greatest thing about our community today is everything is online and public. And, you know, the biggest challenge that I had is when I started reading through this, when the author of the report has to write a footnote indicating that he's concerned or he had to amend or adjust that report simply for the fact of meeting a criteria for funding for the city of Hamilton, that was a bit disconcerting. I guess the other thing I really want to emphasize here is a couple of things. I grew up in this city my entire life. I know from east to west, north and south, like many of you guys. I was downtown 2 weeks ago. I could drive a golf ball from the east end of the city to the west end of the city. I just returned from New York City last night. I couldn't walk within 5 feet of hitting some form of transit or people or population moving left and right and center. I guess when I looked at the report, they compared us to larger cities with higher densities, higher populations, and greater number of speeds and all the rest of it. When you look at this report, it's glowing. These speeds are a factor. This report was amended to reflect the formula. You know, I just looked at something right here, and the Bloor-Danforth subway line, which was posted by Trans City, is running at 30 kilometers per hour. How are we going to shave 1 or 2 minutes off, and is it really worth $1 billion? Truly, is it really worth $1 billion? Do you want to be the council that's going to be saddled with this? I have little kids that are going to be, they're growing up. I may not be here, you may not be here tomorrow. This $1 billion that the province is giving our great city is our money. It's real hard dollars. We work for it, we play for it, we earn it. And the collective mass here is going to make a decision based on this skewed cost-benefit analysis. They've paid millions of dollars for these reports and studies. So that's very concerning. I guess the other thing too is that, you know, why would councillors want to go back to their wards and say, hey, I think this is great. I think your taxes going up are essential. I think this LRT is going to be great. And you know what? We're spending $1 billion to go from the east to the west. What about Flamborough? What about Stony Creek? What about Waterdown? What about all the outgrowing lines of our city? We're going from east to west. Think about it. $1 billion. Would you, if you had $1 billion, would you spend it? If you had $1 billion in your checkbook today, and I came to you and I said, councillors, I'm going to give you $1 billion of my own money. Would you do it? Would you spend it? Would you write that check? Would you spend that money, Mr. Mayor? Would you feel that you could take out of your checkbook today and feel comfortable that it's going to help the community grow? This will be something that will be a lasting legacy for this council and the people in this group. I truly, truly want them to reflect on all those reports that were spent and the time and effort of all those people. You know, this is the first time I've ever participated in this discussion, and I'll get you, 97% of the population doesn't even have any knowledge that this is going on. There's probably 3%. And the only time this is going to come out to the public is when the taxes go up. Or, more importantly, have you seen how ugly it is, the LRT? It's got poles every 20 feet. I mean, give me a break. I remember as a little kid going from the Red Barn on Queenston Road all the way out to the downtown. My grandmother to buy eggs at downtown. We had the big, beautiful buses and the poles, and they all attached it. When the operator couldn't get it right, he went outside, pulled the pole back out,
30
and
seconds
on the thing. So when you look at how it appears aesthetically, it's disgusting. I got to tell you, the numbers just don't support it. It's $1 billion. And I know we're getting it from the province, but guess who the province is? Everybody there, everybody here, and everybody there. So just to summarize this, the cost-benefit analysis has to be looked at. It's skewed, it's not accurate, it's not precise. And if you make a decision based on that report, you're being misled. And more importantly, is it something that, does this council want to be a part of? Do you want to go on record that you spent $1 billion? Thank you very much for this time today. And I look forward to further discussions.
Move to receive. Any questions of the presenter? Councillor Connolly, Councillor Ferguson, all in favor? Any opposed? It carries. Next up is Donna Crockett. Take your time. No, one has already fallen today. I don't want to see another.
Thank you very much. To the chair, the councillors, and the important taxpayers that are here today. I'm a long-time resident, property owner, and business owner in the city of Hamilton. I love the city, always have. I'm absolutely distraught that we're thinking of spending all of this money on something we had and abolished 60 years ago. I don't think there are too many people here that really remember LRT, but we call them streetcars.
Just for clarity, this is not a streetcar. This is a higher order LRT, light rail transit. You can't drive. You could drive on a streetcar track. You can't drive on this track. Just for clarity.
You put lipstick on a pig?
I won't interrupt you again.
I'll take that as a compliment. It's the same premise as we had then. It goes on a track. If there's a problem, an accident, one streetcar is not going to pass the other, whereas buses are so flexible. They are particularly good because they come to the curb. For anybody that's old, disabled, or has children, it's a little awkward crossing all of that traffic to get onto the LRT. A gentleman before mentioned travel time. It should be a real whiz that it's so short, but look at the number of stops. Downtown Hamilton at Jackson Square, the next one, not like a bus service, the next one is at Queen Street, the next one is at Dundurn, then we go past the Basilica, over the bridge, past, what's the little street, and Longwood Road, and then we get to where we actually get on another one. Absolutely ridiculous. So long. I mean, even bright, young, eager people, that's a long walk. So the travel time should be really fast because you're making so few stops. To access this LRT, you have to cross the lanes of traffic, which stops all of the cars. Look at the Red Rocket in Toronto. The incentive, this $1 billion, has blinded too many people to a system that was outdated 60 years ago. Absolutely ridiculous. It's been touted as good for development. As a longtime resident and owner of property in the city, I have never seen as much development, particularly in the downtown area, as we've had in the past 5 years. Putting LRT is certainly not going to help the development. I'm on the line, I know what. How many more millions are we going to spend with reports, plans, surveys, meetings? I've been to probably myself, I've probably been to 15. Just unbelievable that so many people are being sucked into this boondoggle. Hamilton's motto has always been an ambitious city. Now we're going back 60 years. Outdated technology. Please stop this ridiculous plan.
Thank you so much. Anybody with questions for Donna? Seeing none. Move to receive, moved by Councillor Partridge, seconded by Councillor Pasuta. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you very much, Donna. And our final presenters are Mark and Elaine, regular delegates at our LRT meetings and our subcommittee meetings as well. As they make the way, and I believe they'll be probably setting up their presentation on our computer here, so I will note that I have had a request that we move item 10.1 up in the agenda. Folks, you will see that discussion item 8.1 is next. However, the Keep Hamilton's Light Rail Transit Public Operation and Maintenance of LRT Notice of Motion, we'll have a motion to move that up in our agenda, and it'll follow this delegation and questions if council so chooses.
I'm back with on and presenting the couple written following the petition on the Facebook feed. I'm going to speak on our behalf.
Thank you for the opportunity to allow us to speak. We are Hamilton LRT Resident Advocacy. Mark mentioned that we have a Facebook feed as well as the signed petition of over 2,000 people for the Yes LRT. This is who we represent and many others. Today we are here to speak on the EPR. We could speak on many items within, whether it be the Shop the Corridor, the trees in International Village, the 1.5% LRT budget allotment for enhancement, or even keeping the LRT public. But today we wish to speak about expropriation and demolition, a concern considering the effects on housing it has currently, and we are in a somewhat of a we are in a housing crisis. Many of our residents do not have homes, have difficulty finding adequate housing. The LRT project with its current configuration obviously will require some space to proceed. Those expropriation, as they are listed in the EPR, and more specifically what I refer to as the Scott Park Bend, are highly affected, where approximately, and please don't quote me on this, it's a hard number to kind of pin down, approximately 140 to 160 households will be affected just in that area. And overall, I am sure many others are. This is a very big concern considering the current real estate market and the housing crisis we are in. How is the City of Hamilton, how is Metrolinx going to deal with the effects on these households and the housing crisis overall? What kind of opportunities for housing redevelopment will the LRT present? Is there partnerships with housing organizations such as Kiwanis Homes or Inwell, or even private developers for shell development? I can speak more on that later. Or even just laneway housing. What are their possibilities, and how does the $50 million housing announcement that was done by the city, how does it affect it in any way, if any way? Are questions we are asking today. This is an issue that affects people directly, and we're very concerned as to how we are treating our residents and the stakeholders along this corridor that will be moved. This also includes business and so on. So we are moving forward with the LRT. We're laying the groundwork for the best results. There are many challenges to address, and many of us have questions, but together we can do it if we rely on council, the support, the expertise that the city has to maximize the socio-economic benefits to residents, businesses, workers, and stakeholders overall. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Mark. Councillor Green has a question for you.
Thank you. Certainly want to acknowledge both Elaine and Mark for their ongoing support of this, and they've raised some questions that I think deserve an answer. Certainly, as the Ward 3 councillor, I've been taking the brunt of the calls. You'll know that the outreach program going door to door along the corridor started in Ward 3. It was an initiative, in fact, that we started before Metrolinx took it on in an official capacity with David Derbyshire and his incredible team who are here today. And there's been a lot of huff and buff and bluster from people outside of our community telling us about the impacts and effects it's going to have around the folks along the corridor. I have personally been in contact with the vast majority of people on the expropriation list, you have listed a house here. I personally went to the doorsteps of that owner and sat on their front porch and explained to them the process. And I can tell you that I have yet in my ward to hear from a property owner that is affected by this that has come to me and said they absolutely by no means want to negotiate with Metrolinx. The process, the deals, the expropriation process, willing buyer, willing seller, is not a shotgun approach, and folks are either taking advantage of the situation. The one instance where we had some residents that had concerns, I can tell you and assure you that through staff, whether it's relocation or whether it's looking at the final picture, they've been supported along the way. But through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to Alan and Mark, I thank you and appreciate raising this as a concern. Displacement of people is a very real impact that we are working together on to ensure we mitigate. So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you to Mark and Alan, just to respond to their questions, there is a process underway right now that's called the Community Benefits Agreement. You will remember probably sometime last year or the year before, I moved a motion at the subcommittee to specifically identify housing as a community benefit, looking at, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the surplus lands that have been accumulated by Metrolinx, knowing that not all of them will be used in the design of this, to have covenants placed on these properties that would essentially be earmarked for social housing or for social housing providers in partnership with some great institutions that we have here in Hamilton. So a very real concern, and that's the purpose of this committee, is to unpack this stuff. But I can tell you with assurance that I'm confident the density, things around inclusionary zoning, looking at Metrolinx's surplus land, there are ways that we can work creatively and in partnership with the province and with our social housing providers to be able to implement in a full way the relocation and or the positioning of residents that are there now to stay in our communities. So thank you.
If I may, Mr. Deputy Mayor?
Sure.
The owners are one thing, and I'm not debating the issue. Unfortunately, a lot of those buildings are also renters. And how does that fit in, if I may ask?
That's a very valid question. When we go door to door, along that corridor, our teams are connecting with people that are there. Owners typically are not present, and so the first face-to-face contact is actually happening with the residents. And in scenarios where there have been renters that have had questions, that's part of the position in the office that we take to be able to help liaison between them, advocate for the renters, and hopefully, at the end game is improve their living conditions. It's also the case some of these units along this line have been neglected for decades. It's also the case that some of these units are in inappropriate, underhoused, unsafe environments. These are all complexities that we deal with around this table. We deal with it, and we dealt with it, Councillor Whitehead, at the Subcommittee for Housing. So they're certainly being addressed. And just for the record, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I do not delineate between a homeowner and a renter, between a property owner and somebody who happens to be renting there. For me, we have one class of citizen in Hamilton, and those are the folks that live here, and that's it.
Right. It wasn't renters in the sense of it's sometimes they're not available, or the negotiation, the expropriation, and the whole property process is one thing. Renters are obviously not within that discussion, if you wish. Apartment building owner versus renters. I completely agree. Renters and owners, residents are residents.
Okay, thank you very much for your delegation and the good questions and comments. Any others? Move to receive the delegation. Moved by Connolly, seconded by Whitehead. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you, councillors. Thank you to our delegates. And a quick note I have here that any media or members of the public are reminded that your entrances and exits are top east and west. Move to bring 10.1, which is the notice of motion, up in the agenda and deal with it now. Moved by Councillor Whitehead. Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, if you're going to move item 10.1 up, you must move item 10.2 up as well. Although they conflict, they'll need to be dealt with at the same time.
although they conflict, they can be dealt with at the same time. Is that what you, okay.
Yes, I'll walk you through that.
10.1 and 10.2. So we'll move section 10, notices of motion, up in the agenda. That's moved by Councillor Whitehead and seconded by Councillor Jackson. All in favor? Carried. Any opposed? Councillor Green, you have a motion.
Thank you very much. We are looking at a notice to waive the rules. It's listed here as a notice of motion, but I'd like to waive the rules and deal with this accordingly.
Seconded by Councillor Merulla. All in favor? Carried. Any opposed? Seeing none. Rules are waived.
So the, what, procedurally, we're clear? Okay. Thank you very much. The motion is before you. It is moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Conley. It is to keep Hamilton's light rail transit public, the operation and maintenance of LRT in Hamilton. Whereas the City of Hamilton's public transit service, the Hamilton Street Railway, has been running transit in Hamilton since 1873, and whereas the Amalgamated Transit ATU Local 107 has language in their collective agreement with the Hamilton Street Railway that their members will be operating any new transit in the City of Hamilton, whereas transit is an essential public service that should remain under public ownership and operation, whereas the Metrolinx procurement process for the new LRT transit line excludes the HSR from bidding as it cannot finance, build, or design the new LRT. Therefore, be it resolved that staff be directed to advise Metrolinx that the forthcoming operating and maintenance agreement between the City of Hamilton and Metrolinx for light rail transit should include Hamilton Street Railway as the party responsible to operate and maintain the new light rail transit line and any other future transit expansions in the City of Hamilton. So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, this motion has been put forward as an extension of a formal staff direction put forward by Councillor Tom Jackson in October of last year. We have been at this for now 10 years. We have answered critical questions around this table, and I want to provide some clarity. We have answered the questions through 10 years of research, reports, and studies and votes. The what, we have determined that we will be doing LRT. The where, we have determined that it will be along the B line. And the why, we have, for a long list of reasons, supported around this table the LRT project along the corridor through the B line transit based on economic development, based on the jobs that it will be creating in the city, based on the developments, the tax uplift, the climate change. All of these reasons we have clearly articulated around this table, I think, for the entirety of this term. So that's not what's at question here. What's at question here is, I think, the crux of the procurement process, and that is the how and the who. And so within this Metrolinx agreement, and you'll hear comments from some of my colleagues who have the bureaucratic memory of this file going back 10 years, the language within the Memorandum of Understanding that will permit us to enter into this negotiation to make the request to make HSR a option and the preferred option of this council. Mr. Deputy Mayor, this debate has been positioned as one of the biggest infrastructure investments in Hamilton. It has been also positioned as one of the most divisive debates around this table. But you will recall, at almost every step along the way, one of the consistencies of this council was its stated support for HSR. One of the consistent positions of this council was the understanding that we want a deal that is best for the City of Hamilton. We want a deal that we often call a made in Hamilton deal. That has never been up for debate, and I think one of the proudest things in the passing of the environmental assessment, in the entering into the MOU, was that around this table, regardless of where people stood on the issue, when we decided to move forward with this project, we did it with a statement that we would support our HSR and, by and large, the ATU along this project. And so we know already, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that the collective agreement of this city covers local transit. That gives the municipality jurisdiction over operations, and that gives by law and through contract, ATU, collective bargaining successor rights. This is a local project. If it was a project that connected with the region, then there might be a case, a legal case, in my opinion, for the province to say it's completely under their care and control. But there's been lots of hysteria and confusion out there about what it means to be public and what publicly owned and operated means. And I think the beauty of this motion that's before us today is that for the vast majority of councillors around this table, we will come out with consensus in supporting our public transit system, in supporting the decisions that we made in a 10-year transit strategy that integrated HSR in a meaningful way. We have with us here today the ATU, which, as has been rightly pointed out, started as the Hamilton Street Railway, has a 100-year history dating back to when rail connected this city. I myself have at every phase along my life used and relied on HSR, whether it was dropping me off at school as a kid or taking me to work, or as it does today, taking me here to City Hall. It takes me home to my families. It's an opportunity, regardless of your class or your geography, to connect with people in public transit, and I support it. And I'm so proud in this opportunity that we have before us to send a clear message to the province that we support and we believe in our HSR as well. Mr. Deputy Mayor, there have been lots of people in our community who support this project, who suggest that somehow this is being used by folks who don't support LRT to take it off track. And I disagree with that assessment. I believe in the integrity of the people around the table, that moving forward with this project, we all want what's best for the City of Hamilton, and understanding that we have approved LRT to continue and have invested in LRT. We just want to see what's best for the City of Hamilton. And so for all those reasons, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'm a strong supporter of LRT. I was assured, and I know we heard comments around this table, this happens, big infrastructure projects happen in phases. Some councillors who I may have been opposition with in the past said we don't have the information. We assured them that as the information became made available, we would have those complex discussions around this table. Well, here we are, folks. We are in procurement. We are in a situation where what we sold this project on in terms of good jobs, community benefits, and local impacts are before us in a very historic way. And so they are quite right that once this procurement process is signed, sealed, and delivered, that it becomes non-negotiable. But with Toronto and Ottawa both having ATU operate, there is precedent for this. With the extension, thanks by and large to Councillor Whitehead and others who pushed it all the way to Stony Creek, we have the opportunity to have connectivity throughout our suburbs with an increased investment in HSR running north and south. And it's my hope that with that 10-year strategy, this truly is the beginning to the blast network that we have all bought onto. And so the how and the who is before us, and that's what this motion is about. We won't get bogged down in the confusion or the misdirection or the misinformation of some folks who would wish to come before us today and try to take this thing off the rails. I strongly support LRT, and I strongly support HSR, and I even more strongly support ATU 107. But we do no favors by pretending that we're, supporting the union by saying that we're going to unionize Metrolinx regardless, because they can do that anyways. That's called legislation. They have the right to organize. The question is quite right, though, about what are they organizing from? Are they organizing from the basement or from the ceiling? And those workers that have been serving our city for over 100 years, they deserve to have pensions. They deserve to have benefits. They deserve to have great paying jobs and careers to serve our public. And I'm not clear that absent of that conversation around this table, that that's going to be available to them. I'm not clear that after we sign this procurement contract, that our community benefits agreements that we're working out with in the community and our community groups are going to have teeth in this process with whomever comes on to design, finance, and build. But I know in this city, with historical unions like LaUna and others, that somewhere out there, there was a creative joint partnership between the municipality and labor and development and the unions to come up with a made-in-Hamilton approach that provides us care and control over this project, that sets a standard across this province to let the government know that our public services ought to remain in public hands. And so that's what's before us here today, and that's what I'm asking for your support on. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
I got Councillor A. Johnson and Merulla chiming in at the same time for second-time speaker, so, or sorry, for the second speaker and the first time, so if you want to work it out between the two of you.
Okay. Thanks, cheers.
Councillor
Thanks,
A. Johnson.
Mr. Deputy Mayor. Councillor Merulla generously agreed to let me go first. I'll look forward to hearing his remarks in a minute. Mr. Deputy Mayor, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I will be voting against Councillor Green's motion. However, I am for unionization of our LRT workforce. The argument I'm making today is for the status quo memorandum of agreement that we've hammered out with Metrolinx. I have 4 arguments as to why the status quo memorandum of agreement, as hammered out, is better than advocating for an amendment that would have HSR running LRT. Before I get to my 4 arguments, I'd like to thank Councillor Green for bringing his motion forward. It stirred up a very good and I think a very necessary discussion about labor standards and the question of unionization and our LRT workforce. I'd also like to thank the leaders of ATU who have very patiently engaged me in conversation over the past 2 months about this extremely complicated, extremely sensitive, and extremely important file. I've had the privilege of 2 meetings with our ATU leadership on July the 4th and July 24th. I was joined at those meetings by staff. In particular, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I would like to thank Eric Tuck, a true leader in our city, and Dave Rossborough at ATU, as well as Paul Thorpe, who is our national ATU president, and Manny Sforza, International Vice President of ATU, who joined in at the July 24th meeting. I continue to learn a lot about ATU and what a great union it is, and about our HSR, and it's been very enriching. I'm going to turn after my arguments to some questions for staff, but just quickly, since I'm on the theme of thanks, Paul Johnston and Andrew Hope and Brian Boudou and Robert Burwash, among many others, have been laboring away on all of the questions that are tied up in Councillor Green's motion over the past 2 months, and their labor is appreciated. They've helped me understand better also. So on to the things I really want to say. These are my 4 arguments as to why the status quo memorandum of agreement is better than going to Metrolinx and asking for the amendment that Councillor Green proposes. First is the incentive argument. I'll get to what that means. The second argument says LRT project is good. Advocating for the proposed amendment creates a real risk of killing LRT by accident. Third argument, unions are good, and the unamended agreement that we already have is compatible robustly with a unionized LRT workforce. Fourth argument, public control of transportation is essential, and our unamended status quo agreement provides for that. Good news. So the first argument is the incentive argument. The status quo memorandum of agreement that we have hammered out has one entity, private sector entity, to be contracted to Metrolinx, designing, building, operating, and maintaining. This is good because we want the LRT built right. Built into the status quo memorandum of agreement is an incentive for the builder of the LRT, who's also the designer of the LRT, to get all of the details right, to build an LRT that will literally not break down. Why is that incentive built in? Because that same builder designer has to maintain and has to operate. That incentive is removed if we start dividing up and parceling out the various functions. Let's not remove that incentive. Let's do what's responsible for the LRT system and for all the taxpayers of our community by including that incentive. And the good news is that incentive is already built into the status quo agreement. That's the first argument. Argument 2 is the LRT project is good. Let's not risk killing it. Mr. Deputy Mayor, I believe in diversity of tactics, and it's very clear to me that Councillor Green and ATU are passionately in favor, not just of public transit in Hamilton, but in favor of the LRT project. I am too. I've been a rider of HSR my entire life. But, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I have great concern that if we vote today to go to Metrolinx seeking an amendment to our painstakingly hammered out memorandum of agreement saying we now want to operate and or maintain municipally, that we create a significant risk of death by delay. Necessarily we create a delay, Mr. Deputy Mayor. We cannot afford that delay in an election year. Let us not risk the very hard-won victory that we have in our LRT project in the city. Let's keep this thing going and on track, so to speak. The third argument, Mr. Deputy Mayor, unions are good, and the unamended agreement is robustly compatible with a unionized workforce. And I'll go further. Unions in general are good, and public sector unions are a good thing, Mr. Deputy Mayor. When I was a staff lawyer at Legal Aid Ontario, I had the privilege of being a participant in the union drive that brought a union to the staff lawyers of Legal Aid Ontario. I'm very proud that we succeeded and that the staff lawyers at LAO are now represented by the Society of Energy Professionals. Mr. Deputy Mayor, both of my parents are teachers. My life would be totally different in a very negative way if it were not for ETFO, the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario. My grandfather was a steelworker and later in his career a member of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. I strongly believe in unions, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and that's why I'm bringing forward a motion later to affirm the principle that our LRT workforce ought be unionized. Good news, and Councillor Green referred to it, the Ontario labor legislation that we already have, the Ontario Labor Relations Act, does guarantee our future LRT workers the right to unionize, should they so choose, and I would be deeply surprised if they did not so choose. That right exists, and I think we should be advocating for that right. We don't need HSR to run LRT in order to have a union representing our LRT workers, and we don't need HSR running LRT in order for ATU to be that union. Argument 4, Mr. Deputy Mayor, is public control of public transportation is essential, and the unamended agreement sufficiently secures that control. So, Metrolinx, and many people don't know this, Metrolinx is an agency of the Government of Ontario. Metrolinx is going to be owning, operating LRT. Thus, ownership of LRT remains public. That is good news. Oh, and incidentally, as the Memorandum of Agreement clarifies, should our future private sector partner, the contracted out builder, designer, operator, maintainer, screw up in any way, violate the high standards to which we will be holding it, Metrolinx retains the legal right to take LRT back. So those are my arguments as to why we do not need for HSR to run LRT and why the status quo is good enough. With your indulgence, Mr. Deputy Mayor, may I please ask a couple of questions of staff? No? Okay.
Right now.
Then I'll turn to that later. Thank you very much.
Ask questions of staff following our, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, we're in a motion here. So yes, please.
Yes, I may? Okay.
Sorry.
Thanks very much. So I've been in conversation with our legal staff around the sensitive legal questions that are tied into Councillor Green's motion, and I would be grateful if either Mr. Boudou or Ms. Audi, our city solicitor, could comment on the question of the legality of the status quo and the steps that have been taken in investigating that question and the steps that we are still taking and information we need to have going forward.
Wait, I got a point of order.
Point of order. Our legal department, if those questions were asked, has not provided this council with the responses to those so that we can raise our own questions around it. I have nothing in front of me in writing. So if there was one council got the benefit of getting legal advice outside of the bounds of this council, I think it's duly unfair and not equitable in the sense that we can ask and review and do our own research and ask pertinent questions to the question. So my problem is that if there's a report to be had on the legal, then we should have a report in front of us.
Okay. Madam Clerk, is that a point of order?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Unless Councillor Whitehead can provide me with the subsection in the procedure bylaw that shows what order is or what point is not being adhered to, I don't believe it's a point of order.
Councillor Whitehead, do you have that?
However, if he's asking for a report, that's different, but I don't believe it's a point of order.
Chair, we're asking our legal, on legal advice that was given to one councillor in absence of providing. Most times when we meet with people, the first thing staff asks is, could we send this response to all councillors so they're all informed on the question asked and the answers being provided. We haven't been provided any information on this particular question from our legal. In absence of a report, I think it's unduly unfair, because the problem and challenge I have is if I feel that I want a second review of that answer, I have no opportunity to do so at this time.
You have an opportunity. You could move a motion.
Absolutely. Mr. Deputy Mayor, I completely agree with Councillor Whitehead. I don't believe it's a point of order, but I agree that if he feels it's more comfortable as well, because it's been practiced that legal has provided either responses to all members of council for the most part or a report. I don't have an issue with that either. After this motion's done, he could certainly ask for a report back.
But the question is still legit.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And
Can you proceed down and repeat the question?
Sure. So what steps have been taken to date in researching the question of the city's legal obligations and our adherence to those in the context of this particular motion?
Okay.
And to preview, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I can tell you, we don't have all the answer yet. So that's actually, I want to hear about the incompleteness of what we know.
Okay.
So that's really what I'm driving at. And also another qualification, and I had this chat with legal already. If the conversation goes in a certain direction, or if in response our legal team thinks that we have to go into some sensitive areas, I would ask we not say anything that would require us to go in camera. However, there are certain bits of this that would require us to go in camera should we go there. Our legal department knows that. So what we're going to share today is stuff that can be shared in public.
Okay.
And if we need to go in camera for some reason, I don't anticipate that option is there for us.
Nicole, you've seen the motion. I'm sure you've given it the once over. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, through you, Deputy Mayor. So I will turn this over to Brian in just a minute. I just wanted to speak very briefly to the council's concerns in terms of having discussions outside of council. Absolutely, if the legal department is providing a legal opinion, that goes to all of council, absolutely. We do, on occasion, have conversations and discussions with councillors, as you're aware, in terms of having those discussions and answering those questions. We always answer questions if we're asked, but if a formal legal opinion, absolutely will come to council. And I think Brian will speak to that opinion in terms of this issue.
Thank you. Through the chair, you're quite correct. We don't have an opinion as of yet, so there's nothing to share with council at this moment. We have taken a lot of time to gather the facts, to understand the facts, to engage outside experts, a number of months to work on these issues. And when we do have an opinion worthy of sharing, we will share it with everyone at the same time.
At the appropriate time, I'll come back to you. I'm assuming you want to move a motion for legal opinion on this motion?
I'll reserve it to my comments later. Thank you.
You still have the floor, Councillor.
Thank you very much. So a legal question, if legal can answer, does HSR need to run the LRT in order for ATU to be the LRT union?
Through the chair, no.
Who?
All right. Hey, there's no heckling. Thank you. Thank you very much. Question again, Councillor Johnson?
Sorry, I'm asking legally, does HSR need to run LRT in order for ATU to be the LRT union?
Brian?
Through the chair, the answer is no.
Okay.
Got it. So my next question, Mr. Deputy Mayor, is for Andrew Hope, our great LRT coordinator at Metrolinx. And the question is a historical question about what happened within Metrolinx vis unionization and the LRT train workers. It's an interesting story that sheds, I think, relevant and good complexifying light upon our conversation.
Director Hope.
It has to do with the Teamsters.
Through the chair, Councillor, I assume you're referring to the current operations of Go Rail Transit,
Yes.
which is contracted to Bombardier Transportation. That was a switch that happened approximately 10 years ago. Prior to that point, the GO Rail trains were operated by either CN or CP, depending on which corridor, who owned the corridor the trains were operating on. I believe it was 2007, the decision was taken to contract that out separately to Bombardier, both for operations and maintenance. And those workers who were part of, ended up being Bombardier employees working on GO Rail operations and maintenance, initially joined the ATU and were represented by ATU for a period of time. ATU also operates our GO bus operators and maintainers at this point. At a certain point after that, the Bombardier rail operators and maintainers did decide to join a different union, so they are currently represented by Teamsters, but they are unionized.
Thank you. My last question, Mr. Deputy Mayor, has to do with HSR history. And our delegations today referred to the great history of HSR. And we know that for a time, the province ran HSR through Ontario Hydro. These days, our municipality does a great job running the HSR. And a year and a half ago or so, I had the privilege of moving a motion in this chamber for a museum display in concert with Hamilton Public Library to celebrate and raise awareness of the history of HSR. We should be celebrating HSR. We should be celebrating the great history of ATU, which has always helped for HSR to be great. My question is to our cultural staff about where are we at in the development of museum display and proper public celebration of our HSR history. And this is relevant, Mr. Deputy Mayor, because just as I don't want anyone to leave this conversation thinking that unions are not respected, I don't want anyone to leave this conversation thinking that HSR and its proud history is disrespected.
Okay, we'll challenge your relevancy to that question to this motion, just because Ian Kerr-Wilson is a wise man and he's in attendance, so go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through the chair, yes, about a year and a half ago, you bring that, 2 years actually ago, you brought the motion, and then we came back with a report just about a year ago where we identified 7 initiatives to celebrate and preserve the rail heritage in Hamilton. We're underway with 4 of them right now, or they've been completed. The next step is going to be working on a what we call a semi-portable modular exhibit on rail history, which would put mass transit and HSR in the context of the development of the city. We start that in Q4.
Great. And thank you very much. I won't put Andrew on the spot, but Mr. Hope indicated that there's a possibility that we may be able to incorporate celebration of our transit history in Hamilton at our stations for LRT in some way. So not a definite, but fingers crossed. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Aidan Johnson. Our speaker list includes Councillors Ferguson, Pearson, Connolly, Vanderbeek, Jackson, Skelly, Whitehead, Mayor Fred, and next, Councillor Merulla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me start off by saying that everything that Councillor Johnson stated was a concern of mine as well when the notice of motion was presented. And I believe my comments publicly were directed accordingly. The issue at hand, though, however, is that we're not in a position where we're trying to amend the MOA at all. We're actually in a position of not renegotiating, but negotiating at this point. And if I can just have everyone refer to the memorandum of agreement, and I'll read it to you verbatim. It reads that the project will be designed, built, and owned by Metrolinx and operated by or on behalf of Metrolinx on lands in the city of Hamilton which Metrolinx will either own or in which it will have real estate, real property interests. More importantly, it reads, Metrolinx is the owner and developer of the project with responsibility for and control over scope, budget, scheduling, planning, design, and construction. Acquisition of the real property required for the project except as otherwise specified, and engaging in public consultation. The determination of who will operate and maintain the vehicles and be responsible for certain matters auxiliary thereto, including maintenance and operating costs, will be determined at a later date and included in future definitive agreements. Hence, we're not breaching the memorandum of agreement. We're negotiating the memorandum of agreement. We're building upon what we already signed off on and approved. So it's not a reconsideration. That was my original concern. It's not an amendment. It's a negotiation. That's what we're here for. Absolutely. So on a personal level, and more importantly from a personal level, is the public-private component. I've never supported privatization that is considered an essential service. The only thing I've ever supported was HEC-5, which I don't believe we should be in the amusement industry, but I do believe we should be in public transit industry, and that's why I would never support privatization. And I wish this would have been brought up sooner, to be honest, because throughout the process, dating back to 2005 or 6 when it started, it never came up. So, to in all fairness to us as a council, inputs what create outputs, and my understanding with the silence equaled endorsement. Understanding that perhaps the goal was to organize as opposed to operate. So in all fairness to all previous councils and this council, this issue has never been brought to the forefront to us at any given time except over the last few months. And now I'm prepared to support it. Wish it was said sooner. And looking back, I remember when I first was elected, fighting for the water and sewer treatment plant to come in-house. It was a hell of a challenge, but we succeeded. The only part of the city that has public waste management is in the lower city. And it's because of people like Councillors McCaddy, former Councillor Horvath, Morelli, myself, and Collins. We believe in public service. I truly believe in public service, and will continue to fight accordingly. And also, a little saddened by the fact that when I brought forward the Hydro One motion to prevent Hydro One from being privatized, that I didn't get this kind of support from the public. I didn't get any support from the public. Actually, you could drop a pin in this place when I was fighting the privatization of Hydro One. And unbeknownst to me, I didn't understand why at the time. Wish we had somebody organized at that time when we had an official motion on this table, which was defeated. So we're officially on record supporting the privatization of Hydro One, which is what financed the LRT project, ironically. So a little disappointed that never happened. Darts transportation. I've been trying, it seems like since I've been born, to bring darts in-house. I've never, now the motions are brought forward, had anyone come in this great number to try to bring in darts transportation so that the paratransit, so that people with disabilities can be on an equal playing field as the Main Street public transit user. So just for noted sake and for future reference, perhaps when these issues do come forward again, because I know I will be bringing them forward again, that we can garner some support. Because when you're flying solo and you don't have the support, it doesn't go very far, as all those motions have failed accordingly. So getting back to what we're dealing with today. There will be challenges with this though. And let's face it, I'm not going to candy coat this. When we're looking at the private versus public, there will be more of an impact than the general levy. Hence, there will be more, I guess, maneuvering for those that are opposed to this project to try to kill this project. So let's not candy coat this, because when the numbers come back and the bottom line numbers are presented, the cost on the general levy will increase. I'm prepared to support that, knowing that. Is everyone else around this table? Does everyone else around this table feel the same? I don't think they do. So, having said that, and I'm hoping that everyone is supporting this for the right reasons, but after nearly 20 years of being in elected office, can't help me for being a little bit skeptic on why some people are supporting this. And I'm going into this wide open, with my eyes wide open, understanding that public service is something I strongly support, but I want the public to know I'm supporting it because I believe in public service, not trying to kill the LRT line. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Mayor Fred.
Thank you, and thank you to all the ATU members that are here, and Eric Tuck and his leadership has been, I think, fantastic in terms of our development and growth of our transit system as we are all moving towards that. And certainly in the last couple of years, we've had significant transit growth and significant ATU member growth, in fact, and that I think is very, very positive and very important. I'm delighted to see that the ATU has kind of put on paper that they fully support light rail transit as part of the letter that we received from Mike Gallagher, business manager, Local 793. I think that's an important message to hear and understand, and that we continue to move forward in a positive direction, understanding with eyes wide open what the costs and benefits are going to be. So I want to focus on kind of separating HSR from ATU, because ATU, I mean, I fully support unionized workers here. We have a number of scenarios actually in the city of Hamilton where we've had a hybrid model. Garbage is one of them. Airport management is another. For a period of time, we had a private operator, never privatized, but a private operator in our water treatment, sewage treatment plant. And we have other scenarios where private operators do work on behalf of the city of Hamilton. So this is not a foreign entity for the city in any way, shape, or form. However, there are issues that come out of the HSR being deemed to be the operator and manager of this project. And so I'd like to turn to staff just to kind of give a sense of what sense of responsibility and cost we're taking on should we be the operator and manager of this particular line. We are then taking on full responsibility for anything that might go wrong on this particular line as well. So Paul, could you kind of answer, I mean, I'll preamble that by echoing what Councillor Johnson said earlier, is that this is done because we want the designer and builder to design and build in such a way that it is cost effective and efficient. And to do that, making them the operator and manager actually makes that happen. So given that preamble, what are we taking on in terms of responsibility should we go down this road?
So through the Deputy Mayor, we'd be taking on much more of an active role in all the elements, the very technical and very detailed elements of the operations and maintenance of this system. We're always interested in the overall operations, and regardless of your procurement model, we would always have those protections in place through our agreement with Metrolinx. So things like frequency of service, obviously the stop locations, those types of pieces, all of those pieces are there. But we have, as a staff team, not participated in the deep conversations on elements of this project because, quite frankly, we haven't needed to because we're not the operator. Those include things like, you know, deep level operational performance requirements, the track work itself, track design and all the rest plays into operations. We're assuming that those that would be bidding would bring their expertise to the table to do that. So to date, we've not chimed in a fair bit. Even the development of the operating maintenance and storage facility, the IT requirements, all of those pieces would be coming as part of this package. You would simply be accepting the expertise of those organizations. So we would be taking on both the need to do that immediately and build the team, which we don't have at the moment. So build that team either through consulting or through direct staff hires to do that work. So that we can inform the request for proposals process and the project specifics output specification process that then goes into the Metrolinx IO world. And then the other piece is, of course, on an ongoing basis, we're responsible for those costs. There won't be a negotiation around it. You would accept the responsibilities of those costs as being absolute. And those costs would fluctuate a little bit more because we wouldn't be entering into a fixed deal over the 30 years, if that's the concession period where you would know what those increases were. Those would be much more fluid as they are with our normal budget processes. So those are some of the things that are there. Do we get more direct control out of it? Absolutely. And in fact, in March, when we presented you a report around the differences between the two methods that are used in Ontario, we'd be actually going with a method that isn't used in Ontario to date on LRT. But in Toronto and Ottawa, they are design, build, finance, maintain. And the Hamilton, Hurontario projects and the Kitchener-Waterloo projects were proposed to be design, build, finance, operate, and maintain. And we provided you with a bit of detail around the differences around that in March. This would be us going into a design-build finance piece and requesting that the procurement process be that. So a little bit of a different game where I have less comparatives because Toronto and Ottawa are not under that type of procurement model either. So there's not a lot that I can look at in the province of Ontario to understand what those differences would be. That's the work we'd have to do to come back to you around.
Okay, thank you. And so there's going to be, first of all, we're taking on more risk in terms of being the operator and maintainer of the facility. I'm assuming so. Right now, the risk is laid on the feet of the operator and manager in the private sector through the design-build process. Is that accurate?
Through the Deputy Mayor, generally these procurement processes, what I say, the less letters you have, the more risk you're assuming. The more letters you provide to the private sector, the less risk that's there. It's not an absolute science. Nothing is perfect in these worlds, but of course, as has been described previously to you, because you are asking someone to both build this and obviously also finance it and design it, but then operate it and maintain it for that 30-year period. The realities of some of the risks of not getting everything right in the design and build phase are removed from that process. It's simply the requirement of that consortium to fix those issues and move forward. And that's what does happen. I can relate direct experience from talking to, in fact, the operator in Waterloo around that. They missed a couple things in their operations center, small things, and they're just having to fix those and move forward. No impact to the region. So that's the risk you transfer over. We'd be assuming some of that risk. But of course, the other side to that is, as folks will point out, is that we will have more direct control, obviously, on all those elements ourselves.
Thank you for that. So we are going to assume risk if we don't go down that road, if we do go down that road. We are going to be building in, as I understand it, Paul, a fair wage provision in the negotiated agreements, a revenue sharing model that will be part of the negotiations as well in terms of the operating and management. An integrated fair system is another criteria objective that we have, and a confirmation that the life cycle costs are 100% responsibility of Metrolinx. Is that a fair kind of a characterization of the kind of negotiating position we're going in with, wanting all of those? And I believe that Metrolinx would likely be adhering and agreeing to all of those. Can you kind of shed some light on that?
Through the Deputy Mayor, that's certainly our, we call them the principles of our operations and maintenance agreement. Those are certainly core principles for us. Some of those we have seen in other agreements in Toronto are built in. So the 100% life cycle contribution by the province is built into the Toronto agreements. The fact that the municipality in conjunction with Metrolinx sets the fares, it's not the consortium, it's not Metrolinx on their own. Those are all things we've seen already. So obviously we would not take a backward step in negotiating our agreement. The one piece that we've added in, which we have communicated to Metrolinx, is this council's desire to see a fair wage type policy imparted into our agreement. That's not something I've seen in the other agreements, but it's certainly something we've made known to them.
Okay, so I'd certainly adhere to all of those points as being very important key issues that we need to build into this. As this rolls out into the RFP process, is there anything to prevent a consortium from approaching the HSR at any point in time and saying, we want to have a discussion with you about contracting you to operate this facility on our behalf? Did we get that question, or do I need to answer that again?
Through the chair, Mr. Mayor, I'm certainly am not aware of a situation where through this model a municipal operator has directly joined a consortium to bid on this. I'm not sure of the legalities of that. I would have to look into that, but that certainly has not been the case previously. As we discussed previously, though, there would be nothing preventing the ATU from representing the workers that would be operating or maintaining the LRT project.
Okay, thank you. So I mean, those are opportunities that exist. It may not have been done before, but it certainly is a potential possibility. So that could include some discussion about how the HSR fits in without having to take on the operating and management responsibilities through the contractual kind of arrangement that we're currently seeing. I think that's an important distinction. So that's my worry in all of this is, you know, as I said, I fully support the ATU and our HSR and our transit system have been advocating for increased investment in transit for years, have appreciated and supported the great work of the Amalgamated Transit Union and all the work that they're doing, and appreciate their support in bringing LRT into our community. I think that's a very positive step for all of us. But I worry about the additional responsibilities that we're going to be taking on in the absence of having that information. So we know that there is a cost, but we don't know what it is. And, you know, if we're going to go down that road, if council, and I will not be supporting that direction, I think the direction that we're on is proper and appropriate, something that we've agreed to and has been part of the process right from the very beginning. I will support a motion that encourages the unionization of everything associated with the LRT line and continued work in that direction. I think that just makes sense, and if I were the ATU, I'd be working on unionizing you know, sooner rather than later, and possibly other unions may be doing the same. I'm not sure about that. But that's, I think, an important element of this, and fully support that. But worry that, deciding today on changing gears and putting the HSR into the mix is going to need and require a lot of additional information that we currently don't have on the table. So we'll see how this motion goes. But I mean, I think it's critically important that we not support this today. I think we need information from our staff, eyes wide open in terms of what the impacts are going to be, a full analysis of that so that we can understand and appreciate what we're taking on as a municipality in terms of this responsibility. And it's not small. So I'll not be supporting the motion that's before us. I hope and pray that we're not using this motion to derail, as others have mentioned. And you know what, there's a risk of that, unfortunately, that this is an opportunity to throw another wrench into the mix here and try and delay this even more. I think that would be very, very unfortunate to do. I hope that people are going to vote on this on conviction. And certainly the models that we have out there today in terms of private sector, public sector mix are not foreign to this municipality, and we've used them before. We currently use them now. And I think this is not to preclude a fair wage policy and all the legal issues around organizing and everything that we support in terms of unionizing employees that want to be unionized. So I will not be supporting this motion today, but I will support the alternative motion that encourages full unionization of all the employees related to the LRT line. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you could take the chair for I need 5 minutes. The next speaker is Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So far we had one of our speakers, one of our councillors talk about 4 arguments: incentive, delay, union control. We had another councillor speak to the fact that this process enables us to have this discussion today and look at the possibility of having HSR operate, maintain, and maintain the LRT system. And then we had another speaker who was a former lobbyist for American Water, which was a private sector operator, speak to the fact that there's risk. Well, I want to talk about for a moment, just for a moment, risk. Councillor Pearson, myself, I can't remember who the other councillors were, sat on a procurement process regarding our water system and realized that American Water was soaking us. And soaking us in the sense that, excuse the pun, they were making profit, taking low risk, and all the risk was being imposed on the city. So we started taking that low-hanging fruit and addressing it through the procurement process. So when that bid went out, and that low-hanging fruit and those risks were put back onto American Water, their bid, if I recall, came in close to $56 million. I think we only budgeted around $40 million or $42 million for the operation. City staff are currently running that system at under $40 million, high-quality water in the city of Hamilton. So here's the question. If you believe in public service, do you believe there's room for the private sector, because this process is about a third-party operator coming in, even though they're overseen by Metrolinx, billing a profit margin into what they receive, because they're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. So let's be clear, there's a profit margin built into this whole process. I'd rather have every dollar in the system go directly to the service. So that's the challenge I'm having with this current model. And that's why I will be supporting the motion before us today. When we talk about incentive, it's a bit of a weak argument, or it's a straw man argument, because I guess it concerns me then, does that suggest every contract we go for today, that we don't give them operating and maintenance arrangements in the contract, then we're going to get an inferior work on the capital expense? Of course not. So I think it's a bit of a straw man argument to say incentive. Delay? This is not about delay. We've already heard clearly that we have the opportunity to negotiate this into the process. We've already heard that other communities already have it in their process. So I'm not clear. I mean, I understand that some might perceive it as such. Let's be clear, that's not my position. I think there's a fundamental principle when you're talking about essential services that we got to be careful about those profit margins and understand that that's built into this budget. Unions. Well, let's be clear. And I've been involved, for 14 years as a councillor, being somewhat critical, be criticized by some in respect to some of my views on transit system. My views are that we should expand it. No question about that. In fact, I'd love to see it more expanded on the mountain. But I can tell you, one thing I'm proud of, that each and every one of those frontline workers are second to none in delivering the service they provide in this community. And I want to thank them personally for the great work they do. Control. Now, one of the big arguments, and look at what happened to the stadium. We didn't have control, did we? Look what happened. We had deficiency after deficiency, and we have an ongoing legal mess that we're embroiled in because we didn't have the oversight. A third party had the oversight. We were left out providing comments from outside in. We weren't inside controlling those processes. And now we're bearing the results, which may be putting taxpayers in this community at risk. Do you want to relive that? Do you want to talk about risk? Is there not risk when we don't have some level of control over our future, over our maintenance, our operating? Control is important. We've always argued around this table when it comes to essential services that we want to have that control here. We want to know that we don't have to go through 3 different levels of phone calls to get a response to a problem. We want to know that one call does the trick. Well, we're going to create a bureaucratic system because we're going to have a third party, we're going to have Metrolinx. Where's the control for this council? And respecting to ensuring that we got the highest level, and I want to assure you that I'm sure Metrolinx has the same standards. But that's a third party providing that standard when fundamentally I believe that it's our tax dollars being spent and we should be the ones in control of the highest level of service in this community. One of the councillors mentioned that, and I'm a big private sector supporter where it makes sense. I think the HEC-5 one, thanks to some of the councillors around this table, including Councillor Merulla, made sense. But on your transit system, your water system, be careful. Be careful what you ask for. We have an opportunity here, ladies and gentlemen, to take probably the people that have the most stake in seeing this city be successful. And that are the men and women that live here, that deliver the service every day. I would rather put my trust and faith in those individuals than put it to some outsider who's making a profit margin and looking at way they can trim at the expense of a service. There's been long arguments why public health care should not be privatized, because the concern is that profit becomes the driving force and the service will be deficient or challenged. I see this no different. We have an opportunity here on this horseshoe to make a statement, and make a statement based on principle, that we believe that essential services to this community are important. Transit is part of those essential services, and damn it, they should be run, operated, and maintained in this community. Thank you.
Councillor Skelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick comment. You know, I've been in this chair for just over a year, and often I've heard reference to the 50-plus times that we have voted in favor of LRT. 50-plus times investing in what will be the largest infrastructure investment in the city's history. Not once, however, in those 50-plus times, did we vote to ensure that we would retain control of this project. Not once did we vote to ensure that the people who will operate it will work for HSR or be represented by its union, ATU, and protect good-paying jobs paid for through the public sector. It took, and I want to congratulate Eric, it took a grassroots, well-organized campaign by your union and by the riders of the HSR to ensure that we are now addressing this today. I am going to support this motion because I really, truly believe that you have done a darn good job, and I want to see that you continue to operate what is our biggest infrastructure project. We have to protect these jobs, and we have to keep this project under the city's control. I will be supporting this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And I want to thank Councillor Green for bringing the motion forward, and also want to thank him for the respectful reminder that at our first marathon meeting on this LRT matter, October 25th of last year, during that 13-hour session, I did publicly ask Paul Johnson, our LRT coordinator, and Andrew Hope about the possibility, Mr. Deputy Mayor, of our ATU operating the LRT line if it was to ultimately be approved. They said they would take it under advisement. They said it may be difficult. They said outside of the TTC in Toronto, they weren't aware of any other places where an LRT project had the local transit authority operating it. But anyways, at least it got the conversation started, and I was a consistent supporter of ideally having that happen then. And on April 26, Mr. Deputy Mayor, my speech, which all of you were very kind enough to allow me to submit for the public record to the Clerk's Department, which was on our website, one of my 5 stipulations from that 2-page speech, Mr. Deputy Mayor, was also that local ATU would be given consideration in potentially operating the system. So I'm going to stay consistent. I know that President Eric Tuck, I believe that amongst all the brotherhood and sisterhood of the various unions across the city, and I'm not speaking for them, but I remember a number of them appearing here at a couple of the marathon meetings at the end of March and early April, where presidents like Anthony Marco of the District Labour Council, Mark Elliker of the Building and Trades, all basically pleaded, requested, strongly advocated for getting the environmental assessment approved on April 26 to give them a chance to sit at the table to argue for community benefits and as well for the fair wage policy to be implemented and hopefully hiring of local trades as a component of the bidders package to provide the 3,000 plus jobs we've heard and talked about for constructing the LRT. At that time and over this term of council, to my knowledge and in past discussions I've had with ATU President Eric Tuck and members of his executive, they've been patient. They have understood that there's a large segment of this community that feels this could be a transformative project for the city. My interpretation is that, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the ATU ideally would have loved to have a BRT which would have created even more jobs for transit employees down the road. However, again, I'm not speaking or putting words in their mouth, but this is in conversations I had with President Eric Tuck. He was patient. He waited his time. He wanted to support the building and trades if the community truly ultimately wanted an LRT, but ideally and ultimately it should be operated by ATU, by the public transit authority of our community, and the job should be public sector employees. So now today it's his turn to be thanked on behalf of the 500 plus ATU members of the City of Hamilton. It's now his turn to be appreciated, respected, and supported for what he's asking for, and which is through Councillor Green's motion. And you know what, Mr. Deputy Mayor? Councillor Merulla, in an excellent speech he gave in reminding us all of his strong, consistent support for public sector and public services in our community, he clarified at this time that this is all part of the negotiation phase. And you know what, Mr. Deputy Mayor? The province just might, for a variety of reasons, they just might be amenable to this type of negotiation occurring at this time. So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and lastly, my reading, skimming through the current agreement that's been forwarded to the province, Mr. Deputy Mayor, my reading of it is the language in there is very flexible. The word may, M-A-Y, currently and consistently, I read throughout the document, which provides potentially the flexibility. So let's lock that language of may in and make it solid, make it strong, make it unequivocal, that we want if the LRT line gets built, we want it operated by our ATU, and that's why consistently I'll support that here today. Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. First of all, I'd like to thank all of the workers who showed up here today. It makes a real difference, and I'm very appreciative of that, and I am a strong supporter of both the HSR and the union. And given, I'm not going to reiterate everything I've heard today. We've all heard it, and sometimes 2 or 3 times. I'm just going to say that I'll be supporting this motion. Thanks.
Councillor Connolly.
Thank you. Well, most of the stuff has been said, and I'm not going to reiterate everything neither. But I don't like the perception of, it won't be built right. There's going to be delays in it. It's the death by delay. Those are scare tactics. I don't scare that easy. Okay. I think a lot of good points have been said. I think that even in the contract that we have with the union, it says they will have exclusive rights to operate our systems in Hamilton. LRT is a system being built in Hamilton. And I agree with it being built from Hamilton to Grimsby, maybe it's not. But it's very clear. We negotiated that contract. We signed as a city that contract. And now we're saying we're not going to respect that contract. That is not right, and I cannot support anything. So I will be supporting the motion presented by Councillor Green. Thank you.
Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and I'll try not to reiterate because a lot of great points have been raised today, but I just want to first and foremost again thank Eric Tuck and all the workers here today and all the workers and passengers who've sent out the petitions that went out to us, the number of emails that we received. I am truly, truly proud of our service. I spoke with Eric Tuck last week and I said, well, Eric, you know my position on LRT, different than here, but at the end of the day, I always said and always will say I support our HSR transit union 100 or 200%, not even 100%, 200%. Our ATU I support 200%. I am a proud user of HSR, have been for many, many years, and I think all of our workers do a tremendous job out there in representing our city. And it's not easy. We all know that if we've taken transit, it's not easy, so I certainly appreciate everything all of you do every day. At the end of the day, the decisions will go forward of whatever comes out, but I think for us around this table, it is very, very important to support our ATU. And I will be doing that today on this motion, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Paul, I know the Mayor raised the potential risk of taking over the operations and maintenance of the facility and what that may mean and what risk we may take. And I know a number of members of council were concerned about what the operation and maintenance costs would be. And I know City Hall is a perfect example where we did a design, build, maintain contract, and the main contract was for 5 years. And the reason was to make sure they don't design on the cheap. You know, particularly on specialized things like HVACs or windows, because they have to maintain it for 5 years, and if it's deficient, it'll show up in the first 5 years, and it actually worked quite well. The consortium did operate and maintain this facility we're in right now as a result of that contract. I'm just looking at other risks if we support this project through you, Mr. Chairman. Paul, is there a schedule risk associated with this? Because it sounds like you have to renegotiate the whole agreement, carving out the operation and maintenance part, and you know, somehow put a tighter spec so that to make sure it isn't designed on the cheap. So do you see a schedule risk associated with this motion as a result of having to do that extra work?
So through the Deputy Mayor, there is certainly a risk to schedule. One of the realities is we have to start procurement over again. The RFQ for this project has closed. If the province was to accept new terms of that, it would have to be reissued as an RFQ. More of what we'll have to take back, though, is the time it will take us to be ready to do this work on your behalf. We will have to, and I appreciate the comments, you know, DBF doesn't mean bad end result. We have to put in much more time at the front end on things that we weren't putting time into because we were trusting that the consortium, and not trusting, knowing that the consortium would bring together the expertise around that. We will have to spend more time on that. Our project-specific output specifications document was to be completed next month. That can't happen now. So there's a risk to schedule. I can't sit here today to you, and although I've had some thoughts around it, there's a lot of contingencies. If this council will provide some resources so that we can get some of the answers quickly, that can help, because of course all of my budget is contingent also on a negotiation with my good friend to my right here and Metrolinx. So I don't have any resources at my disposal staff-wise to bring you back some of the answers you'll need. I'll either have to negotiate that with Andrew over the period of the next little while if this passes, or come back to you and say, will you provide some resources to do it? So I think more of the time risk is actually on our side. If everything was fine and we were comfortable, probably we could you know, run the RFQ very quickly. I'm speaking for Andrew right now. I don't know what the province will say, but they could run the RFQ quickly, and you know, and we may not lose a lot of time. But I think, you know, to answer some of your questions, if you need answers to all of those questions for your satisfaction, that is going to take us a little bit of time, and I'm concerned about schedule. Eastgate pushed us to the max of our Gantt chart now. And this pushes us a little bit beyond it, but as always, we'll have to come back with an updated chart if this is to pass today and ratified next week, so that you can see where we stand schedule-wise, and we can do that at your earliest convenience.
Okay, and I know schedule's always been an important issue for a lot of us, and by the way, your staff have done, you have done an amazing job of keeping the sucker on schedule. And the intent here was to try to get a contract awarded before the next provincial election, because you run the risk of a different government being elected and going in a different direction and canceling the project. That was always the risk, and that risk will become real now, because to go through an RFQ process is 3 months, and then you got to rewrite the whole RFP that carves out the maintenance and operations. And so we by supporting this motion, we are taking a very significant risk that another party gets elected and decides not to invest $1 billion because it didn't elect any MPPs in this area or for a variety of other reasons. But we take a big risk that the funding will be pulled, where if the contract's awarded, Mr. Chairman, it's pretty tough to cancel it once there's a big cost associated with canceling. And so I suspect what's motivating a lot of my colleagues to support this is that they've been opposed to the LRT all along. And this is another way to chink at it and get the thing killed. And for the big supporters of LRT, why take this risk? I mean, my inbox was filled up with hundreds of emails from on this matter from the ATU. They all said the same thing. They're all the same letter on it, but you know, you had to go. I'm not sure why they tried to intimidate us. Why aren't going to the owner, which is Metrolinx, or better yet, in my experience, and I bid a lot of these design, build, finance, and operate in my previous life, and the unions would come to us and try to make arrangements, and we would. For example, in the 407, we made arrangements up front that we would use 2 specific unions, and they in turn. If the gallery wants to shout me down, I'm simply going to stop. And so that there be a no strike, no lockout, because completion on a certain timeline was important to us. So I don't know why the ATU isn't going, once it made public, who the 3 shortlisted consortiums are and make arrangements directly with them. Every worker in this province, by law, as Councillor Johnson said, is entitled to become representative. All they got to do is have 50% employees vote to support a union, and it's in. And ATU can either go and meet with the consortiums ahead of time and make arrangements that they would provide the operation of it and the employees, and then the city isn't taking the risk. We don't know how to maintain track. We don't have any supervisors or executives that know how to do that, or how to maintain an LRT train. That's a whole different expertise than running a bus. And I think everybody would understand that. And so this worries me. It worries me on the risk. There's the operating risk. Now it becomes a real unknown. At least before we award a contract, we will know what the operating costs are because they're put in front of us when we make the decision, yes or no. That's the one big decision that's still left for us. We lose that opportunity now to understand up front what the operation maintenance costs will be once they slit the envelope. And, you know, there's a lot of people motivated by trying to appease their union friends by supporting this and putting the project at risk. That frightens me if that's the motivation for some people to support this resolution. So clearly, I'm not going to support it. I think we stay the route. You know, it's putting a whole big extra load on our staff. But one last question, if I can, through you to Andrew. Andrew, is there a possibility the province could say, since you're going to now want to operate and maintain it, the province may pull back on the project? Is there a risk in that? Because I know that's the model that Metrolinx has used in other parts of the province.
Through the chair, obviously I'm not going to speak on behalf of the government and how they might react to this, but I would say, as Paul mentioned, the motion as it stands to have operations and maintenance not be part of the procurement would be a departure from any of the previous LRT projects that have been funded across the province, whether it be Toronto or Ottawa, where they, in those cases, did go with a DBFM approach. So, you know, we would have to take this back. Obviously, if a decision were made to pass this motion, we would have to go back and have conversations with the province about what this means, because we would need new direction from the province to change the procurement model at this point.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, there's a third risk, and there's probably a lot of them. You know, one risk is what's our cost, because we won't know when they slit the envelope. Number two is the schedule's at risk, which means it becomes a political football, not only during the provincial election, but there'd be a bunch of candidates running on anti-LRT in the next municipal election, where if it was awarded, that would be off the table. And so I think we're opening up a huge can of worms by trying to amend this thing at this time, because it's going to become probably a political football, because we got 2 campaigns to go through, and then risk on cost and on and on and on. So I can't support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Partridge.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And a couple of questions before I say my comments through you to, I think it would be Paul at this point. Paul, in some of the questions you answered before, and good questions, by the way, I think this has been a very healthy discussion so far. But I thought I heard you say that there were examples of in other municipalities of the LRTs being operated, but not maintained. So it was design, build, maintain, and finance. And the operation was actually done by the transit system within that municipality. Could you just repeat that again, please? I just want to make sure that I'm understanding it.
Yes, through the Deputy Mayor, you're absolutely correct. So in Toronto, it is a DBFM approach, and the TTC is obviously the operator. In Ottawa, it is a DBFM approach, and OC Transpo is the operator of that. In the report that we provided, we didn't use the Ottawa example, but I've come to learn that's the same as Toronto.
Right.
The reality is they had LRT, or they had rail operations, so that made it a little easier to separate out the O. But as I mentioned earlier, there's none in the province of Ontario that are just DBF.
Okay, so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, then, if I'm hearing correctly, there is opportunity, and perhaps I'll direct this at the Metrolinx folks, there is opportunity for the negotiation for HSR to operate, but not that the maintenance part would be part of it, similar to what they're doing in Toronto and similar to what they're doing in Ottawa. Is that correct?
Through the chair, it's correct that in the case of Toronto and Ottawa, they are using a design, build, finance, maintain approach that would require some changes to our current procurement process that's underway.
Okay, but we could do that. We absolutely could do that. And I guess my question now, and I don't know if this should be, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to legal or to clerks, but the motion as it is in front of us, does it allow for that to take place? To remove the operating part during the negotiation? Because right now it says operate and maintain.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and legal certainly can stop me if I'm incorrect, but right now, they've already done the RFP the full way. So
Right.
if you want them to change it, they'd have to start over. So I believe it could be done if you requested it, if I'm hearing correctly, but it would cause a delay. Paul?
Sorry, can I just ask a clarification? So you're asking, Councillor, is the motion can be amended or the process so far?
No, I'm asking, Mr. Deputy Mayor, if the motion as it sits right now, if my question was to follow the same model that they're doing in Toronto and Ottawa, where it is to operate by the local transit, but not to maintain, that the maintenance is still held by the third party. So it is design, build, maintain, and finance.
Sorry, through you, so my reading of the motion includes both operating and maintaining. So to do something different, you need to amend the motion.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for, because, and I'll leave that up. Yeah, I'd like to have the mover of the motion involved in this conversation, please. So I'm not asking you a question. I'm just saying that I will leave it up to the motion, or to the mover, but I feel that, it may make some around this table a bit more comfortable if we took out the maintenance part. And because there are concerns, we don't know what that's going to mean. And, for the maintenance part of it, for the city to take it on, I think we don't know what those costs are going to be. We don't know if that's going to be a huge burden or a huge impact or exactly what it's going to mean. But I think we have the opportunity to protect ourselves with this motion in front of us. And so I will encourage the mover to perhaps address that. And then if I may make a few comments, Mr. Deputy Mayor? Yeah, thank you. So all along, I think everyone knows that I have not been supportive of LRT. My support has been with BRT. And with the BRT, I believe it would have created perhaps more jobs for our HSR and for ATU, for our local. And that's why I've been, one of the reasons why I've been so supportive of BRT, as well as I just think it would be better for our community overall in the connectivity that we need to do for all our communities throughout the city of Hamilton. But having said that, the vote has taken place on whether it's going to be LRT or BRT. And I want to thank the unions for coming together and coming in to see us today and to speak. And I appreciate very much some of the speakers, who clearly lined out why it should be BRT and not LRT. But that's not what we're debating today. What we are talking about is the HSR maintaining, as a public service, the operation of the LRT. So as much as I am against the LRT, I am hugely supportive of our HSR, and I'm hugely supportive of our local ATU. And so I will support it, provided we can have some sort of an amendment put in there, which I'm seeing the mover of the motion nod. And perhaps that would appeal to some folks around the table who are a bit reticent to support it at this time, because ultimately going down the road, it is certainly my intention, whether I'm around this table or not, to continue to watch the costs that are associated with this particular project and to protect our taxpayers going forward. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Partridge. Did you want to react to the question? And
I think I'm on the second time speakers.
we're not there yet.
Okay.
You are first speaker on the second time speakers list, which follows myself, so if the mayor will take the chair. Paul, how much have we, through you, Mr. Mayor, have we spent so far in our LRT office to date, approximately? Paul Johnson.
So through the Deputy Mayor, I'm going to defer to Andrew in terms of the overall costs. All that I see on a regular basis are staffing costs, so that's in a few millions. But Andrew holds the contract for the technical advisor and property and things along those lines.
Andrew?
Through the chair, I can get you the exact numbers, Councillor. The latest number, I don't have it in front of me, but I believe we had expended approximately $50 million at this point.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, Andrew, when the agreement and whatever modification may come to that agreement comes to us for our final true LRT vote of this term of council, how much approximately will our LRT office have spent by then?
Through the chair, it's difficult to give you an exact number. There are areas like property negotiations, which would obviously have a significant impact on that, and that's difficult to predict. Depends on how many agreements we reach before that time. It would certainly be higher, though, for sure.
And you're, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, you're in that process right now on the property agreements. How far along are you, through you, Mr. Mayor?
Through the chair, so we have a property acquisition unit that's been established that's staffed by city staff that are actively underway, and I believe approximately 75 negotiations at this point.
And just remind me, Andrew, through you, Mr. Mayor, we started this RFQ. Where are we in the RFQ process currently? When did it begin, and when was it intended to end, just as a reminder?
Through the chair, so the request for qualifications was issued on February 2nd, 2017. It closed the first week of April 2017. We have now completed our evaluations and are just going through final approvals to select the three bid teams that will be invited to bid on the project.
Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Paul, you made reference to, I didn't catch it all, but we're always hearing we're a creature of the province, this municipality. The province guides us, rules over us, for lack of a better term, but it's essentially true. And so you had referenced, with regards to what's before us today on operating and maintaining, that this would get a vetting through the province, and that you expect, you said something to the effect, if the province were to accept this or something to that end. Can you add some clarity to what you said a little earlier, answering, I believe it was, I can't remember which committee member's question, and how will this be vetted through the province? Should we approve what's before us today?
So through the mayor to the councillor, the motion as it states is that staff be directed to go and indicate your will. I do know in talking to Andrew, they received approval. So Andrew has to go through approval processes as well around the procurement process. So their approval process through Treasury Board was for design, build, finance, operate, and maintain. And that's what drove the RFQ process. Andrew would have some realities on his side through Metrolinx and Ministry of Transportation and Treasury Board to ensure that those changes could be made. So as it stands here, it's about us indicating the will of this council to Metrolinx, and that would need to come back for comment from them as well, because they have processes. Andrew can't unilaterally change the procurement process and just move to a different track.
And to the mayor's comments earlier about the requirement or what he sees as a necessity for a full assessment of this, a full analysis of this, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Andrew again. Now, you probably between now and, I don't want to lead the question, can you between now and council this coming Friday get some definitive answers from your superiors at the province?
Andrew?
Through the chair, just so I understand the question, you're asking about resources to undertake this type of study, or?
Even their comments on the motion as it stands and based on their current work with you to date.
So I can certainly take this. I'm sure the folks at the Ministry of Transportation and the provincial government would be well aware of what takes place today, but I will certainly report back and let them know what the vote is of this council, and I'll have to seek direction on how they want to proceed. Whether I get that direction before the council meeting would be difficult to confirm.
I figured. Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor, then back to Paul. You, I think, in answering our Ancaster councillor's questions a little earlier, alluded to the fact that you may be able to expedite getting us some, I think, crucial answers with respect to this motion if we, as a council, were to provide you with the necessary resources. You didn't, I'm assuming you need monetary resources, and you didn't allude to what that number might be. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, knowing that this, in this very clearly very slow news summer, has been out there for some time, have you any idea, even approximately, what resources may be required from us to you?
Paul Jones.
So through the mayor to the councillor, it depends which track we go. If it's about consulting, and I need to know, first of all, is it O&M, is it just the O, those types of things. Consulting contracts of this nature are, it's several $100,000s to get us the information we need. We have another route to go, which is to staff up. But in either case, if I need staff resources, if I'm looking at consulting resources, if they're from this council, obviously we have to come and request that. If it's through Metrolinx, I also need to come back here and let you know what we're doing with our staffing. So regardless of how this plays out, and I'll have to think about this as what's the fastest way to get here, because I'm bound and determined to keep the schedule. Although it's becoming increasingly more difficult to do that. But to try and keep the schedule, I'd have to come back with some idea of what it might take. Those are some preliminary things I could certainly do in the next week and maybe give you a bit of guidance through the course of next week. But at this stage, I'd be guessing.
Okay, so council is Friday through you, Mr. Mayor. When you say the next week, do you mean this week and that you're going to have some answers by 9:30 a.m. Friday morning? Sorry, next Friday, right, sorry.
Right.
So by 9:30 a.m., sorry, that's right. My apologies. So 10 days from now, roughly.
So through the mayor, obviously, given the conversation today, I will have as much as I can by next Friday. Whether it's the total package, I don't know, but I'll work with Andrew, I'll work with our staff. I'll try and bring you as much as I can. And the goal, of course, would be the next Friday, give you some sense of how we can get going on this if this change is approved.
We're getting somewhere. I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the comments and questions that I've heard, and I certainly appreciate the ATU. I think they know that. We had a little barbecue a couple of weeks ago over at the Public Works Yard at Shadok, and I had some good conversations. I was enlightened by some, even representatives of the ATU from outside of our city, and I know some are in this room right now, and I do very much appreciate the hard work and Eric and his leadership, and deservedly his recent win to maintain that leadership. So it's been this has been pretty tough, and I'm actually still in some ways deliberating, and mostly because, and I think all of those LRT supporters, and it's quite clear from the applause, by the way, I heard earlier from some of these delegates, that just because you're wearing a blue shirt doesn't mean you're an LRT supporter like the ATU is. However, timelines are huge for me, and they were bigger going into this meeting than they are now. Understanding, and I opened my questions with how much have we spent to date, we're roughly at 50 million. Understanding we're going to be at 80 or 90 million dollars spent on this project, whether we approve this motion or not here today, by the time we get our final vote before this council in some months from now. I know the big argument is, and I appreciate that argument. I've had discussions with certain councillors on the argument that, well, you know, if we push this Gantt chart, if we push the limits, and we just heard Paul say it's been tough, but they've managed to maintain the time frame that is set to be conclusive prior to any provincial or municipal election. And that was important to a lot of us. It was the first motion of the LRT subcommittee: create a Gantt chart and make sure we get this thing in the bag prior to any provincial election, but things could change. But I can't think of anybody who would be elected to a higher order government or municipally that would want to say, yeah, we've spent 90 million or $100 million and just throw it all away. Even if they campaigned on it, I think they'd have a real challenge, no matter who they represent in terms of party politics or municipally. So, you know, it kind of puts that whole concept up in the air for me. So for now, we do have a second-time speakers list. I will say this: I'm more leaning towards supporting what's before us, but getting as many answers cleared up between now and 10 days from now on Friday. So I almost want to say, but I won't at this point, that I would reserve my right to change my mind, and I'm not a flip-flopper. It's only happened once. So I really would like to at least possibly reserve my right. No, just the once. Just the once on the parking meters out back when we I flipped in planning committee on the credit card issue. So with that, I will still continue to listen. We have probably 3 or 4 more on the second-time speakers list, and that second-time speaker list starts with Councillor Green, and I'll take the chair back. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, before you do that, you want to add Councillor Whitehead to these.
I will do that, and so Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and I think at this point in the project, actually have a much greater appreciation for Councillor Partridge's insistence that we go full GIC with this as a special committee to be able to tackle the complexities of this file. There have been some great points raised, and I think one of the best points raised was this conversation around the 407. Because, you know, in speaking with the media, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I made the analogy that if as a councillor, after this motion, should it have failed, I moved a motion that we would look at privatizing a lane of King Street and a lane of Main Street and doing an ETR-style private transit system or private lane system along that, I would probably have massive calls for my impeachment. And then to further that, if I were to hand that over, these private lanes of traffic, to pay for drive type scenarios to a private sector after it's been publicly paid for, I mean, I can assure you I would have an election that would probably be my last. So the 407 is a great example of what happens when public dollars go to private companies, when taxpayers pay for corporate profit. That is a fantastic example. I'd also like to, again, reiterate the fact that despite the opinions of where we are in the past, or where we were in the past, we're seeing around this table people providing leadership to move this file forward. And, you know, I think the conversation around unionizing this after the fact is highly problematic. It takes no courage to support workers' rights that are already guaranteed by law. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to Laura Fontana, for clarity, so people understand exactly what's at stake, Because again, I'm concerned that people speak about strongly supporting unions and strongly believing unions when it's clear they don't understand unions. So through you to Laura, what does our fair wage policy mean, and does it include matching benefits and or contractual collective agreement concessions that have been fought for by the ATU? What does our fair wage policy say? Is that guaranteed?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the fair wage policy refers to the fair wage schedule that only cites hourly wages. So it does not necessarily include benefits.
And so, you know, Mr. Deputy Mayor, as somebody who proudly is home to Stelco and 1005 and seeing what happens when bad federal policy results in the loss of our pensioners' rights and benefits, I can tell you what that looks like. And if the people going into this contract negotiating from the basement instead of the ceiling are only promised equal wages but not equal benefits, it's of no use to the ATU union or to any worker who decides to organize after the fact. And so, you know, it concerns me. I'm alarmed when I hear so-called progressives passionately calling for the status quo. That is not progressivism. Calling for the status quo is not progressive policy. Progressive policies are fighting for and continuing to fight for what's best for the workers and for the residents of this city. And so for that, you know, some of the things that have been said around here that have already been covered out, I don't have to repeat it, but I did have to state that that very, I think, light motion that was to follow mine lacked thought and depth that covers a very complex issue. And so the issue around whether or not it's operations and maintenance, I think, is a very fair point. We're in a negotiation standpoint. And I believe in holding firm in negotiations. And I understand that this council nor this committee has the final say in this project. I will keep my motion as it stands, understanding that in the negotiated phase, it may be the case that Metrolinx in the province with a halfway point or a concession. It may be the case that in the next week or so, there's an opportunity for quick conversations to be had. But to take maintenance off the table when we understand the challenges, we understand this provincial government is already in a lawsuit with Bombardier over some of these issues, I think doesn't give us the best negotiating position to enter into with Metrolinx. And so quite like what Councillor Merulla stated, this is not a renegotiation, this is not an open negotiation. Based on the MOU, which I have other copies for if people want to rehash on it, I've handed it over to the media. This is the phase that we're in. And I appreciate, you know, like through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I appreciate when past concerns raise to the point that we don't have all the information. But we need to negotiate from a position of strength and from solidarity. And what that means is us having a united faith and belief in our HSR system, which we've heard passionately articulated today. It's having an understanding in the complexities of collective agreements, because it might be the case, as has been articulated by Councillor Conley, that that's already law. This is a local transit system. Therefore, we do have care and control over that, and those workers' rights are guaranteed in that language. I, like Councillor Whitehead and others, I stand by that. And so from that perspective, you know, saying you support workers and saying you support unions and then actually doing it, here it is. It's before us. It's before us as it stands. I believe when it goes back to the province and Metrolinx, the political football will be played. I'm very comfortable playing football, spent 20 years doing it. I got my helmet on and I'm all strapped up. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and I look forward to your support.
You require... You're going to require more equipment than just a helmet. So Mayor Fred is next, then Councillor Whitehead on the second time speakers list.
I want to thank everyone for lessons learned today, you know, lots of them being thrown around. The issue is what's before us, and you know, my concern has been and continues to be the maintenance part of this, that there's costs that we're going to be assuming here that I think are not rational or not necessary. So if we can separate the operations out from the maintenance piece, I could probably live with this motion, and I'd be happy to make some amendments to suggest that Metrolinx consider the operating agreement as part of the HSR responsibility in all of this. I worry about the maintenance part. That's the area that we now start taking on responsibilities that we ought not be taking on, because we're not the builder, we're not the designer, we're not the contractor that's building this thing. We ought to make them responsible for maintaining this particular line. So I'm completely open to modifying this motion and having our staff report back to this committee with the results of negotiations. So if, as you say, Councillor, that this is a negotiation and a discussion, that we are asking them to consider including this, then we certainly need to be cognizant of the results of those negotiations and any additional costs or responsibilities that come out of that before we actually make a final decision on that issue. So if the mover of the motion wants to amend this to take maintenance out, I'm comfortable with that. And wants to add a B that suggests that staff report back on the results of negotiations and any future and final costs before our final resolution, I'm comfortable with that as well. Then I can support this motion. But the way it sits today, taking on maintenance on a project that we're not building, not designing, and not at this point not operating, and certainly we should not be taking on responsibility of maintaining. So if the mover wants to make those amendments, or you can come back to me, and I'd be happy to move that as an amendment on this motion, that we can then take the maintenance portion out of this and get back to a full reporting on what the impacts of that discussion are going to be. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I'm going to let our next speaker speak, and then you can speak to what's been suggested. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you. Could I ask, through the chair to staff, who's responsible for the maintenance of the stadium currently?
Through the chair, it's staff. It's city staff.
Who designed it, contracted it?
Through the chair, the stadium was designed through a design-build finance that was led out through the province Infrastructure Ontario and the constructor was ONSS, Ontario Sports Solutions.
Thank you. So we currently maintain it. I agree with Councillor Green that leaving it in and having that discussion doesn't mean that it's etched in stone. It means that this is our starting point in the discussion, and we'll see where the path leads us. I also believe in economies of scale, and I believe that, well, let's go back to the RFQ. So the RFQ ended. I don't see Rick Mail in the crowd here, but I've had a pretty good lesson on the purpose of RFQs. One is it's to determine the expertise of who's bidding and the interest. Two, it is to determine their financial wherewithal to do the job. So can I ask, in these projects with Metrolinx across Ontario, are there a lot of different players, or is it pretty consistent in the people submitting RFQs?
Through the chair, it varies from project to project. It depends on the project size. Obviously, extremely large projects like the Eglinton Crosstown will attract a different set of bidders than a mid-sized project such as this or here in Ontario, or a smaller scale project. So frequently, obviously, you do see similar names across the projects and various roles in each of the consortium, but it can vary again depending on the project size.
So is it fair to say that that sector that is involved in these type of tenders, the number of companies are what, more than 10?
Through the chair, there's a number of companies on all different facets of the project. So the way when these consortiums form, you'll have certain contractors who are responsible for construction. You'll have certain ones that are responsible for design, and there's any number of companies that may decide to join one of these consortiums to bid.
So I understand the difference in the context of the consortium, but I'm talking about the actual people taking the responsibility to put the bids in. Is it in the 50s? Is it in the 20s? Is it in the 10s? How many consortiums out there are bidding on Metrolinx projects in Ontario?
Through the chair, as I said, it differs depending on the project. The mix of who is in a particular consortium will be very different. So it's not exactly the same consortium on each project. It can vary depending on which contract is being procured.
So there's no lead the group that pulls those partners together that are consistent in these bids?
There are obviously large companies that are frequently involved in our bids, absolutely.
Okay, maybe the best thing's on Friday, because I know what the numbers are. I'm surprised that we're dancing around what the number is. So I'm going to ask Metrolinx to provide a list of the consortiums that have bid on Metrolinx projects in Ontario by next Friday. Second question I have is the third-party operator, these consortiums. Do we know when we set out these projects, the profit margin that we build in for these consortiums?
Through the chair, we don't build a profit margin into the bid. That's part of the bid price that the consortiums come forward. So they're under competitive tension. They know they're competing against two other bid teams, and they are required to put their best foot forward on price. So it's not something we mandate, a particular profit margin.
Fair enough. Is it safe to say, though, that they're not bidding out of the goodness of their heart, they're building profit margins in their bids?
Through the chair, I think obviously they are private companies. They need to make a return on their investment.
Thank you.
Merulla, second-time speakers list, and then we'll get to...
Actually, I'll defer to Councillor Green. I believe the question was directed from the mayor to Councillor Green. And
Sure.
Yes, thank you very much. There's been some need, I think, for clarity around what the RFQ is and what it isn't, and what the current memorandum is and what it isn't in terms of what we're contained to. So just to clarify that, the RFQ is a show of the ability to do all five. It's not a guarantee that the RFP would include all of that. So the people that have been put in play have that ability. They've proven that, but it's never been automatically assumed through a procurement phase, which is where we're in now, that that would be the case. So just to confirm that through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to staff, that the RFQ is a show for the qualification, but not necessarily a guarantee on the delivery of all of those aspects.
Andrew, Director, Metrolinx.
Through the chair. So we'll obviously have to have discussions with our procurement advisors at Infrastructure Ontario, but my understanding is that if a change were made to the model, such as being contemplated here, we likely would need to reissue the RFQ.
Yeah, I'm still in the position, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that I will not be changing the motion as it stands. If the mayor wants to move a motion, we are in negotiation, and that is his democratic right. I will stay to have it as it stands with operations and maintenance, understanding where the local opportunities lie and where the control is there around those jobs locally. And so if he wants to parse it out, he can do that and move the motion. I won't be supporting that. Again, just to reiterate, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that you want to go into the negotiation with a full hand. And so even on the basic zero-sum or game theory, to go in with half a hand and to tell them that we're already, on some police, or can we have some more? It just doesn't make sense strategically, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And so for that reason, I still think we go in with the O&M, we allow the negotiations to happen, and if they come back and say that's not the case, then so be it. But to take it off the table is not about being risk adverse. I just think it's a poor strategic choice. So.
Did you?
Make a suggestion that perhaps we can separate the items. So with respect to operating versus maintenance in the motion itself as an A and B. That will help the mayor.
Okay, thank you for the suggestion. That's to the mover?
Yes, I'm not moving that, so yes.
Okay. Okay. You don't want to do that formally at this time? You want to separate A, operating, B, maintenance? Okay, I would only ask that, I read the wordage of this motion, and it doesn't speak in negotiation speak. So that's where I'm kind of confused. And I really, truly appreciate that particular argument on the mover's behalf. I totally agree. Throw as much at it and see where you land is your tactic here, and that's a good negotiation tactic. Taking maintenance out or separating is an issue for you because you want to leave it there as a negotiating tool. But the wordage of the therefore be it resolved here doesn't at least address negotiating to me. So I would ask if I could get some clarity.
Yeah,
there.
clarity. I mean, there's legal terminology around thou shall, thou may, or in this case, advise Metrolinx that they should do something, is a negotiation language that is clearly articulated in this motion. I am not saying that thou shall, I am saying that we're in negotiation.
Councillor Merulla's made the suggestion that you could keep I believe, the advise, and that they should include the Hamilton Street Railway as the party responsible to operate and maintain LRT. That they should, A, operate, B, maintain, doesn't really, do you feel that takes away from your motion if there's an A and a B? Okay, so it would be needed to be moved accordingly. And when would you like to do that, Councillor Merulla? Okay, I appreciate the suggestion. I had myself on the speakers list, but I just spoke, so I apologize, colleagues. I haven't done this in a while. You are next, Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And, I appreciate the clarification very much that the wording does infer negotiation. My concern is the way that I read it, we are saying operating and maintain. So in terms of the maintenance part, there's nothing to negotiate, because if we're saying to them, we're going to take on the maintenance of it, what are we negotiating? It's like, okay, it's your cost, you can have it. So that's where my concern is coming from. And, we can look, I'm also very cautious of reworking motions on the fly. And we've talked about that before. We could perhaps do that between now and our next council meeting, which is a week Friday. And perhaps I would ask through you, Deputy Mayor, to Madam Clerk for a comment on that.
Through Mr. Deputy Mayor, if the motion isn't done on the floor today,
Right.
it will go in the GIC report to council as it's put today. And then an amendment to the GIC report you can still do it at council. It would just require an amending motion to the GIC report.
Okay, so if we do it at council, it would need to be lifted from the GIC report and then an amendment put forward?
No, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. No, it would be an item already in the GIC report that would need to be amended on the council floor.
I mean, I'll leave it with the mover, what he would like to do, but, I just think that you would perhaps get a little more support around the table. I always like to have as close to unanimous as possible, and so if we can do that, removing the maintenance, there maybe during negotiations, the third party is going to turn around and say, well, we want you to take the maintenance, or they'll negotiate part of that. But as it is right now, we're giving it away. That's the way I read it. I could be completely wrong, but I think we're saying we'll take on the maintenance part of it, full stop, no problem. And that could be a huge cost to us. The operating part I agree with, absolutely. So I just want to put that out there as a caution for you. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, question through you to the clerk, Stephanie. If this motion is carried the way it's written today, and through negotiations, as the mover suggested, they come back and say, well, no, you have to leave the maintenance in as part of the negotiations, would it require a 2/3 majority then to rescind the maintenance part of this motion?
Through Mr. Deputy Mayor, no, because council hasn't yet approved it.
No, once council approves it.
Once council approves it, if you want to change it, yes, it would, because you're changing the intent.
Okay. So I'm just worried about letting this go forward with operation and maintenance in there and suggesting it's a negotiation, because when it comes to LRT, we'll never get 2/3 of this council to agree on anything. So it'll be impossible to change. So I would support the mayor's suggestion that we just amend it to remove the word maintenance out of it, so it's very clear going in. Because I don't want to take another risk, there's too darn many in this project already, that we get 2/3 of council agreeing to rescind the maintenance part, if that's what Metrolinx comes back with.
Okay, I believe third time, right. Councillor Green.
I just as a response to that.
Yep, that's fair.
Motion. Through you to Chris or to Paul, in this process, in the memorandum of understanding, it's clear, and it has been clear, it was clear in the last 3 or 4 meetings, that we are in negotiation with Metrolinx. I can't, through motion, bind Metrolinx. Metrolinx and the city are in negotiation on this project, on many facets of this project, from farebox, all these things that have been spoken about but not officially ratified at this table are already in play. And so I respect the clerk's interpretation of the motion, but that is not, in fact, how this will play out, because I can't bind Metrolinx. I cannot legally direct Metrolinx. What we can do is give them an advice from our position, allow them to come back to this council and say, whatever the case may be, yes, no, maybe so. Maybe they split it up in 2, I don't know. But we allow them to come back and, you know, to Councillor Partridge's point, and past points quite passionately, asking for the information and the numbers, this is that phase, in my humble opinion, where that stuff gets fleshed out so that we understand those impacts and it comes back to this council. Look, I am a rational, logical decision maker. If it comes back that maintenance is a landmine that we've stepped on and has costs assumed that are just not responsible to the taxpayer, you won't need 2/3. Like I wouldn't support stepping on a landmine if that was the case. So those things have to come out in this conversation. This is something, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that I have given a lot of thought to. I have held my tongue on some things in the past because I was told this happens in phases, big infrastructure projects, and we've heard here today, I think, a play on both sides around the timelines. We know that this RFQ went out in February and was approved in April. We know that the RFQ is just about qualification, right? And so I can appreciate, you know, the representative from Metrolinx coming back there, but unfortunately I disagree with his interpretation that RFQ automatically predetermines the RFP. We know that they're able to do that, but there isn't, in my understanding, in that language, definitive directives that they get all in. They're just qualified to do all of that, because if that was the case, you skip RFQ and just do the RFP. And so for that reason, I implore the people who are around the table to, from now until council, allow this process as it stands. I am unwilling to break it up and to go in with a partial negotiating and bargaining position. I think strategically that's a mistake. And I think we deserve to invest, if it's, you know, if it's in the order of 50 or 75 or whatever it is, to get those consultants to kind of bring back the numbers, then let's bring back the numbers. Look, Mr. Deputy Mayor, when I came on to support this in 2014 during the election and went door to door and had conversations on the doorstep before this was a popular thing, okay, in my neighborhood, I defended the project. When things got wacky around this table, I got wacky right along with it, and I did things that I would much rather not have done to move this forward and to defend this project. I continue to defend this project, just as I continue to defend the best deal for Hamiltonians. And as I said, what I'm hearing is exactly what I had anticipated, which was an opportunity for us moving beyond division, moving this project forward, getting a little bit more information. I don't buy the fear, doom and gloom that this is going to take it off track. And I don't also buy that you enter into negotiation of this type of project like blind eye. I don't do ostrich politics. And so here we are, you know, we need to take our head out of the sand. We need to ask those critical questions. We need to have the information brought back to us. And if it's brought back, that it's absolutely a no, we move forward. If it's brought back that they split it up, we move forward. We've decided to move forward at this table. That's not what's at debate. We've already identified that. And if it's 1 month or 2 months to clarify, I'm a strong believer, Mr. Deputy Mayor, nobody on this Metrolinx team is new. Paul's been at this for a very long time. I believe in Chris Murray and our staff, and I believe that they can hammer this out. I think that somewhere in our 10-year transit strategy, somewhere with the new director, Debbie, that the people are in place to make this happen, to have an integrated blast system that's HSR operated and maintained. And, you know, we have it out there. So here we are, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and I appreciate the willingness and negotiation of our mayor and folks that may have came into this room with a hard no, now looking at a maybe. I personally, having the integrity of this motion as worded, thought it through, changed some things, shall to advise, you know what I mean? Like I did that already, and I spoke with Councillor Jackson about what that means in this language. I am okay with this. I believe in this motion as it stands, and I hope that the rest of you do as well. And I hope that when we go in to negotiate, quite to Councillor Partridge's point and her leadership, that we do it in a united way that gives us the best bargaining position. So that's where we're at. And if the information comes back that it's, you know, it's a poison pill, or it's something that's going to absolutely derail this project, I think I've been fairly clear in my support for LRT. But there's conditions in place for every negotiation that you have to discuss. So that's where we are today. And I appreciate the willingness and openness of people to consider this conversation. And if somebody in this democratic processes, you know, moves a motion and does the amendment and you know, breaks it apart and just does operations and not mains, if we want to presuppose a negotiation process here at this table, I will not be supporting that, but I appreciate their right to do so. Thank you.
Mayor Fred.
Appreciate the comments from the councillor, and you know what, I don't argue against the good work that's being done here, and I think we're all probably in the same category that we want to support our ATU and our HSR employees. I think we're all in the same boat. So I want to try an alternate motion that is more clear about what I think would be more supportable. So with your indulgence.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Currently, we have a motion on the table. Unless you want to amend the motion.
I'm going to amend it, yeah.
Okay, if it's an amendment, thank you.
It's an amended version of that motion.
Councillor. Go ahead,
The basis of the motion is it reads like this: the staff be directed to negotiate with Metrolinx that the forthcoming operating agreement between the City of Hamilton and Metrolinx for light rail transit lines should include the Hamilton Street Railway as the party responsible to operate the new light rail transit line and any other future transit expansion in the City of Hamilton. And a B, that staff report back to this committee for the results of those negotiations for final resolution. That's my amended version of that motion. So it's taking, and if I could speak to that, it is in fact taking the maintenance portion out. I have heard, you know, his arguments in terms of what this means, but, you know, this is, the operative word in all of this is should, and I respect that and appreciate that. I get that nuance in terms of this is not mandating, but negotiating. And, but I can tell you that the maintenance part is the problem for me. That is the issue that I can't countenance as I was taking on as a responsibility. And you know what, I don't think we're losing any negotiating clout by taking it out. So I think this motion actually speaks to a negotiated discussion more directly than the previous motion does, and certainly requires that we report back with a fuller understanding of what the impacts of any negotiations are before we actually make a final decision in terms of where we're going to go. So I'm assuming the clerk has the amended version. For all intents and purposes, it is just taking maintenance out of the process and leaving the operating right where it is.
Happy to second that, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I think Councillor Partridge had already made that arrangement, but did you want to speak to the amendment?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate Mayor Fred's watering down of the motion, and in the spirit of compromise, I'm happy to support the amended motion. Thank you very much.
So on the amendment, anybody else? All in favor? Standard recorded vote on the amendment. All in favor? Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Vanderbeek, Councillor Pasuta, Councillor Partridge, Mayor Fred Eisenberger, and slow down. The five standing.
No, you need to read them out. Just read them slower, please.
Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Vanderbeek, Councillor Pasuta, Councillor Partridge, Mayor Fred, Councillor Aidan Johnson. Opposed? Councillor Matthew Green, Councillor Merulla, Councillor Jackson, Councillor Skelly, Councillor Whitehead, Farr, Pearson. Motion defeated. Back to the original motion on the floor, which, and then the question has been called by Councillor Whitehead. And so I can't ask that last question, but that's okay. I got the answer offline. So I'll share my answer that I received offline at council. Standing recorded vote on the motion at hand by Councillor Green and seconded by, well, it was Connolly, he's not in the room, so it's seconded by Councillor Merulla. All in favor? Councillor Green, Merulla, Jackson, Skelly, Whitehead, Farr, Partridge, Vanderbeek. I'm giving you some time to spell Vanderbeek. Pearson. Opposed. Please stand. Opposed. Please stand. Opposed are Councillor Aidan Johnson, Mayor Fred Eisenberger, Councillor Pasuta, and Councillor Ferguson. It passes. Back to item 8.1. And let me get my notes. Madam Clerk. Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, as that motion has passed, 10.2 is mute now, so it would just need to be withdrawn by the councillor.
Councillor Johnson?
I don't think it's moot, but it's pretty moot. Okay. I mean, I think it's clear. The reason I wanted to move the motion was to give those of us who voted against the opportunity to clarify where our hearts and minds are, but I'll accept the clerk's ruling. That's fine. Thank you.
And sorry, I missed that too. 8.1 is the Hamilton Light Rail Transit Environmental Project Report, and a reminder that 8.1 has this added appendices A and appendices B. They've been provided to us in our yellow copies, changes. Any discussions on this, colleagues? Seeing none, moved by Councillor Merulla to receive and seconded by Councillor Ferguson.
Just comment. Thank you to staff for getting this done so fast. Generally, the environmental things hold things up. So congratulations on driving this schedule, Paul. You've done your absolute best, and so it's good to get this done so quick.
Agreed. If only they put us 2 or 3 months ahead in the Gantt chart with this work, but that's okay. You can't work miracles. Well done, guys. Thank you, and a good note. Moved by Merulla, seconded by Mayor Fred Eisenberger. All in favor? So Councillor Skelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through the chair, I have a question for Debbie. And
So sorry, Councillor Skelly, to interrupt. Madam Clerk, we don't have new business on our agenda for this special All Things LRT GIC that we do monthly. But Councillor Skelly has some new business, so is it an appropriate time now to allow her to bring it forward?
Yes, as it's a special meeting, I didn't put it on there, but I'm certain that it's respecting the LRT, so.
I'm sure it is.
Just respecting ridership along the B line. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, Donna.
Debbie, I understand that we have an updated numbers now for ridership. If you could share those with us, please.
Is this LRT ridership?
Well, it's along the B line.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, can I just ask a question? Debbie, are you reading from the report that's not been provided yet? That's going to AFNA?
Through the chair, I would be.
No, that's not appropriate here. It should be
needs to
addressed
come
at
to
AFNA.
AFNA.
please.
Okay, thank you. I have a question then. Perhaps I can get guidance from the clerk. I would like to ask staff to provide us with information regarding updated analysis of the benefit-cost ratio provided based on the figures that were presented today for our meeting on next Friday. Is that possible? Direction to staff?
That information, I believe, is contained in the report that's going to FNA on
No.
Thursday. It's not? I'm sorry. Okay.
It could be revised again, but I'm just saying, based on the information that was provided today.
So Steph, let's just get it looks like Paul Johnson wants to react to what you're suggesting.
I've just asked Andrew, and we're both in agreement we could not provide that by next Friday.
Through the chair, is there a particular reason why?
So through the chair, there's a significant amount of work that has to happen in both organizations, and I'm not sure who did the original work.
Please, it's in the,
It was a consulting firm that did the work, so we would have to go through not just one change to a number, but relook at the whole piece. It was a consulting piece of work through Metrolinx, and we can't procure that, and they can't either by next Friday.
Thank you, through the chair. When can you provide that?
Through the Deputy Mayor, by next Friday, we'll have that answer for you.
Thank you, through the chair. Would you then include, if you require any sort of assistance in pulling this new cost ratio, benefit cost ratio together, I'm sure we could help, but I would like to know what those numbers are, and I would, through the chair, if you're not going to know, if you're not going to be working on it before Friday, we could probably include the new numbers from Debbie that will be provided next week. Include the new ridership numbers.
Is that a
as
question?
well. That's, I'm asking. It's
Okay,
direction,
yep,
part of the
fair
direction.
enough. Through the Deputy Mayor, I mean, we're happy to work on things. If this is a formal report going
No,
back
it's
to...
just a number. Through the chair, just a number, just an update on the benefits cost ratio based on current existing numbers in our report. And we're going to be, through the chair, provided updated ridership numbers next week.
So through the Deputy Mayor, we'll take a peek at what that looks like, and I can also work with the councillor offline in terms of making sure we're getting the right information for that.
Thank you.
Move to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Pearson. All in favor? None opposed? Carried. Welcome back again, Councillor Pasuta.
Used for some reason to kill LRT again.